Chapter 747. Is it Mr. Lucius? If it's him, he should be helping the villagers now. Matthew pondered. After all, Mashu was separated from her beloved senior, and it was unlikely that she would know the location of Lucius. He's in the village. I'll look for him. Don't worry about me. Wuming greeted and disappeared. Wuming was also a follower, so naturally, he could still do spiritual transformation. Only Da Vinci, Matthew, and 100 Faces Hassan were left in the room. "Oh, it seems that there are some contradictions between us," Da Vinci said to 100 Faces Hassan with a cheeky smile. Why was that? Because after Wuming left, 100 Faces Hassan's eyes had been fixed on Da Vinci and Matthew. Unlike Da Vinci, Matthew was a good boy. In any case, in the desert, they did hinder 100 Faces Hassan's work. Therefore, Mashu wanted to apologize to him. That. Miss Hayakuga, about what happened in the desert, Mashu said apologetically. However, before Matthew could finish, 100 Faces Hassan interrupted Matthew. No need to say more. Because of the mask, Matthew couldn't see 100 Faces Hassan's face, nor could he see her eyes. He only knew that 100 Faces Hassan's voice was quite cold. Matthew was quite nervous. In her opinion, this negotiation was messed up. At the same time, 100 Faces Hassan continued to speak. You did hinder me from kidnapping the Sun King's pharaoh, but this time you saved my compatriots, and we're even. Ha! Matthew was taken aback. Although 100 Faces Hassan's voice was still cold, the words he said gave Matthew warmth. But, Miss Smoke-Drunk Hassan, Matthew was speechless. In the end, they didn't save Smoke-Drunk Hassan. In the end, they relied on Smoke-Drunk Hassan's cover to successfully leave. Although it seemed that Drunk Smoke Hassan was trying to cover for the refugees to leave, Matthew and the others were also beneficiaries. Matthew felt guilty for abandoning his allies and escaping. That is Drunk Smoke's choice. I respect her choice. At the same time, I will also believe in the people she trusts. That's great, Miss Yagami. Thank you for your forgiveness and trust. Matthew was pleasantly surprised. No matter who was in the wrong, Matthew would be happy to see whoever apologized first and reached a peaceful ending. All right, reunion. Da Vinci, who had already seen through everything, celebrated with a smile. However, at this moment, the eyes of the 100 Faces Hassan's skull mask glowed. However, that doesn't mean that I've forgiven you for what you did to me in the desert. At that time, the 100 Faces Hassan took the initiative to retreat when he saw the pattern on Matthew's shield. This was a nicer way to put it, but a less pleasant way to put it was scared away. This was a matter of Hassan's reputation. He had to get it back. This was a matter of the reputation of the first Hassan who founded the Old Man of the Mountain cult. Well, he was definitely not worried about being cut down. Matthew was taken aback, and then he put on a look that looked like he was about to cry. The atmosphere instantly became cold again. Click, at this moment, the door opened. I heard from the villagers that assassin is here. Where is he? Where is he? The voice was heard before the person was seen. After the voice reached everyone's ears, the red-haired figure came into view. Gadotsi, who walked into the room, looked around and did not notice the atmosphere at all. Master, please pay attention to the atmosphere. Cursed Wrist Hassan, who came with Gadotsi and was still standing outside the door, reminded her softly and kindly. After Cursed Wrist Hassan's reminder, Gadotsi also realized the problem. Then Gadotsi touched her red hair and looked at everyone with a laugh. Ugh! Ahahaha! Did I miss something? This made 100 Faces Hassan shake his head helplessly. With such a master around, he could not maintain the cold atmosphere. However, this was a pretty good master. On the other side, Wu-ming, who was missed by Gadotzi, was now wearing the silver-white armor and walking in the village. Because the news that a good knight who knew the two knights had come to the village, the villagers did not make a fuss about Wu-ming. This was also the reason why Wu-ming did not change his clothes. An armored knight with a known identity was better than an unknown person wearing ordinary clothes. The latter might cause trouble, so Wu-ming simply did not change his clothes. Moreover, he was now summoned as a Villo knight. Ignoring the curious gazes of the villagers, Wu-ming kept a smile and walked around the village a little, but he did not find the Lucius that Matthew mentioned. Coincidentally, Wu-ming found the woman he met at the entrance of the village. Hence, Wu-ming hurriedly walked up to the woman with the standard smile of a round table bowl. Knight of the Knights, and started a conversation with the woman. "We meet again, Ma-am. I have something to ask. I don't know if it will cause you any trouble." No. No. How could it be? The woman blushed and nodded. "I want to ask where Knight Lucius is. He might be an acquaintance of mine. I want to talk to him, but I don't see him in the village, so I want to ask." Wu-ming asked in an extremely gentle tone, which made the woman feel a little smug. "Ma-am." Wu-ming responded and pulled the woman back to reality. "Yes. Okay, Mr. Villo. The Knight Lucius you are looking for is now at the cliff over there." The woman pointed to the direction Wu-ming. "Thank you, Ma-am." Wu-ming thanked her. Although he did not have any sleeves, he still left like a cloud. After knowing the destination, Wu-ming walked over slowly. Wu-ming always felt that Lucius was not the other party's real name, but a fake name. As for why, Wu-ming could only answer, intuition. Wu-ming's intuition was always accurate, so Wu-ming believed in his intuition. The woman did not lie to Wu-ming. Sure enough, Wu-ming found a knight wearing a white hooded cloak on the edge of a cliff. This Lucius took off the hood, and the silver-white ponytail fluttered behind Lucius. Although the back was facing, the silver hair gave people a feeling that the opposite party was very good-looking. Seeing this scene, Wu-ming did not have any other feelings, only, sure enough. "It's really you, Minister Bedivere." Chapter 748. After hearing Wu-ming's voice, the knight who called himself Lucius was stunned. Then, he slowly turned his head. A delicate and pretty face that didn't look like a knight entered Silent Cry's eyes. "Sir Villo," he said in an inexplicable tone with excitement. Looking at this familiar face, coupled with the way the other party addressed him, Wu-ming was completely sure that the other party was the knight he was familiar with and also witnessed the end of King Arthur, Bedivere. "I didn't expect to see you here." Bedivere knelt on one knee and said to Wu-ming. However, Wu-ming controlled his spirit force to pull up Bedivere, who had not yet knelt down. "You are always like this. I remember I said more than once that the person you need to kneel to is my king." Wu-ming shook his head helplessly. Because of Wu-ming's strength, reputation, and the knight's awe of Wu-ming, plus the relationship between Wu-ming and Artoria, Bedivere would want to salute Wu-ming every time he saw Wu-ming. However, Wu-ming also told Bedivere more than once, or every time, there was no need to treat him like this. Although Bedivere would agree verbally, it would still be the same the next time they met. It had become a habit. However, seeing Bedivere like this made Wu-ming quite nostalgic. "Yes, I understand, Sir Villo." Bedivere stood up and replied. But it was estimated that he would forget again next time. "You, on the other hand, should have already predicted my arrival. In the end, you still put on a very surprised look." Wu-ming teased. However, Bedivere shook his head. "No, how could it be? Although I knew about your news from Miss Fujimaru, and I did think about the scene of meeting you, I didn't expect to meet you at this moment." After all, from the information he learned from Gadotzi, Wu-ming should still be in the Sky Fortress summoned from another world, Abant. He didn't expect Abant to be able to move, and move so fast that he could meet Wu Ming in these mountains. Wu Ming chuckled. Then, with a casual point of his finger, 2 stone stools appeared on the spot. Sit down and talk. Wu Ming sat on one of the stone benches and looked at Bedivere. Yes. Bedivere, like obeying the words of his boss, sat on the stone bench next to Wu Ming. The two looked into the distance together. The beautiful sky made people forget to go back. However, this did not prevent Wu Ming and Bedivere. How much do you know about my king? Wu Ming asked without looking back. Bedivere was silent for a few seconds and then replied. Everything. After saying that, Bedivere lowered his head in guilt. Hearing Bedivere's inexplicable answer, Wu Ming didn't have the slightest bit of confusion. On the contrary, he had already understood the whole story. The holy sword was not returned to the lake sprite, so King Arthur did not die. Without the holy sword, he picked up the holy spear, and finally became the king of the undead walking on the earth, the Lion King, and came to this singularity. In the story of King Arthur, it was Knight Bedivere who was responsible for returning the holy sword. In addition, Bedivere did not respond to the Lion King's summon, so the matter naturally happened to Bedivere. You came here because you want to return the holy sword to my king. Wu Ming thought of the information provided by Da Vinci. They met the help of Lucius, who wanted to sneak into the holy city at the gate of the holy city. What was the purpose of sneaking into the holy city? Naturally, it was impossible to assassinate the Lion King. Combined with Bedivere's identity, only returning the holy sword was in line with what he wanted to do. Yes, you are right, Sir Villo. I must return the holy sword to my king. This is my sin, my responsibility. Bedivere's expression looked somewhat guilty. Looking at the guilty Bedivere, Wu Ming was attracted by Bedivere's right hand. Originally, Bedivere's right arm should have been empty, but now there was an extra silver white arm. With Wu Ming's knowledge, at such a close distance, he could naturally see what the extra silver arm was. It was the holy sword that changed its shape and effect. This is Merlin's technique. Without guessing, Wu Ming knew that it was Merlin's doing. Wu Ming once again thought of Merlin's expression when he told him about the Uruk singularity. That despicable face made it clear that Merlin must be up to something again. And Bedivere was probably one of the things that Merlin did. Wu Ming even thought that he was one of the things that Merlin did. You are right. Because His Excellency Merlin couldn't leave the Forbidden Tower, he helped me inlay this arm and guided me here. Bedivere held his right arm with a face full of responsibility. However, immediately after, Bedivere relaxed. However, since you are here, Sir Villo, I don't think I'm needed. I don't think so. Without waiting for Bedivere to finish, Wu Ming directly interrupted him. Wu Ming looked at Bedivere's somewhat surprised eyes and said, whether as my king's subject or as an atonement, you have the need to return the holy sword to my king in person. Bedivere lowered his head guiltily. I chose the wrong path again. I'm sorry, Sir Villo. However, Wu Ming just smiled. With me helping you from behind, it'll be fine as long as you have the courage to try. This was one of the reasons why the Knights of the Round Table admired Wu Ming. He could always help the knights when they were on the wrong path. Not only for the knights, but Wu Ming was also the same for Artoria. If it weren't for Wu Ming being weak at that time and being sent away by Morgan Le Fay, the Arthur dynasty would not have collapsed, but would have been pulled back by Wu Ming. Yes. Sir Villo, thank you very much. Bedivere smiled. With Wu Ming, he seemed to have a backbone, as if he had 100% confidence in saving the king. The British Silver Dragon not only guarded the territory of Britain, but also the hearts of the people in the territory. By the way, this is for you, Wu Ming said. Golden ripples appeared beside him, and a bottle of red potion was spat out from the ripples. This is... Bedivere caught the red potion spat out from the golden ripples with a puzzled look. He couldn't understand what it was. If it was Merlin, he should be able to understand it. Bedivere thought so. A potion to restore vitality. Your body is full of holes. Although it can't cure the symptoms, at least it can make you feel better. Chapter 749. Bedivere was stunned. Sure enough, how could he hide his physical condition from Mr. Villo? Mr. Villo, you can see it, Wu Ming nodded as a matter of course. I can see it. Whether it's the truth that you are not a servant but a human, or the truth that the arm is constantly destroying your body, I can see it. Wu Ming sighed. It's been hard for you for nearly 1,000 years, Bedivere. Although it was not clear what Bedivere had experienced in the past 1,000 years, Wu Ming knew that it must be a bad feeling. I don't feel pain, Mr. Villo, this is what I should bear. Bedivere smiled at Wu Ming. The strength of the heart was more important than the strength of the body. Nearly 1,000 years had worn away Bedivere's body, but Bedivere's heart was not shaken at all. He had been looking for King Arthur, looking for the king of the undead who walked on the earth because of his mistake. His ultimate goal was to make up for his mistakes. I'm used to the pain of the body. Bedivere's eyes flashed with hope that would not be extinguished. It was a strong hope to redeem Artoria. As long as there was a goal and did not give up, mortals could be compared to gods. Wu Ming smiled. This was the Bedivere he knew, this was the Bedivere he knew, this was the Knight of the Round Table. But it's still the same sentence, since I'm here, it's okay to relax a little. Yes, Mr. Villo, I will rely on you. Bedivere nodded, then opened the red potion given by Wu Ming and drank it. But then, Bedivere's eyes widened. This potion, Wu Ming looked at him doubtfully. Was there a problem with this potion? Impossible, right? It seems a bit sweet. Bedivere said thoughtfully. Wu Ming smiled helplessly. This guy, as always, made jokes that he didn't realize. Assassin. At this time, Gadotzi's voice came from a distance behind. Tachika is here. Wu Ming looked behind him. Gadotzi was running toward here. Then, Wu Ming stood up and looked at Bedivere beside him. Then, let's go, Knight Lucius. Since Bedivere intended to hide his identity, Wu Ming would not ask more, and he would not uncover Bedivere's true identity. After all, this kind of thing should be explained by the person himself. Wu Ming wouldn't cross the line, not to mention that Bedivere was one of his own. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he walked towards the direction where Gu Dazi came from. Lucius. Bedivere shook his head. This name was only given because of his relationship with the silver right hand, so it didn't matter if his identity was exposed or not. At the gate of the holy city, if drunk Hassan hadn't risked his life to hold Gawain back, he would have been exposed at that time. But thanks to drunk Hassan's cover, most of the refugees were successfully rescued by Matthew and Bedivere. In fact, if Bedivere was there, drunk Hassan might not have died. His right hand restrained the Knights of the Round Table who were endowed with the blessing of the Holy Grail, so Gawain couldn't do anything to him. But he couldn't take down Gawain either. However, in that case, the number of rescued refugees may be reduced. Drunk Hassan did not have the silver arm like Bedivere. Bedivere was more efficient in defeating the Solemn Knight. But even so, the result was still uncertain. Maybe none of them could escape at that time. And the past can't be changed, only made up. So Bedivere was not going to regret it, but he was going to take more care of these villagers. Standing up, Bedivere turned and walked back along Wu Ming's path. From a distance, he saw Gadotzi throw herself into Wu Ming's arms. Bedivere had never seen Gadotzi throw herself into anyone's arms, so he was a little surprised. Is the relationship between Sir Fujimaru and Villo so good? The atmosphere between the two looks like siblings. Bedivere's first thought was not a couple, but a brother and sister. If it weren't for the hair color, face shape, and timeline, Bedivere might really think that Wu Ming and Gadotzi were siblings. Shaking his head, Bedivere strolled over and stopped 5 meters away from the two. After all, he was not like Mordred, he was very good at reading the atmosphere. At this time, Gadotsi and Wuming also separated and talked. I'm sorry, assassin, we failed to live up to the task you entrusted to us. We couldn't enter the holy city and be your ambassador. Gadotsi lowered her head with some guilt. But you saved a lot of human beings. I'm very satisfied that you could make the choice you thought was right at that time. Wuming rubbed Gadotsi's little head and comforted her. That's right, I guess that assassin would say that. Gadotsi raised her head, and the gloomy look disappeared in an instant. Wuming laughed involuntarily and put on a "I was fooled by you" look. Well, it's not that Wuming deliberately pretended to be deceived, he's just spoiling Gadotsi. Senpai, in the distance, Matthew panted and shouted as he ran over. Aw, Matthew! Gadotsi waved to Matthew. Not only that, but Matthew was followed by Cursed Wrist Hassan, Hyuga Hassan, and Da Vinci. Cursed Wrist Hassan, 100 Faces Hassan, and Mashu ran over, but Da Vinci walked over at a leisurely pace. Senpai Villo, Mr. Lucius, hello. Matthew, who arrived in front of Gadotsi first, greeted Wuming and Lucius. Is Mr. Lucius here? I didn't see him just now. Gadotsi scratched the back of her head embarrassedly. Don't worry about me, Mr. Fujimaru. However, Bedivere shook his head. He didn't care if he was noticed or not. But you, senpai, you ran too fast. Matthew looked depressed. After learning from Da Vinci that Wuming went to find Lucius, Gadotsi ran out quickly. Although she and Cursed Wrist Hassan quickly followed, they were still left behind by Gadotsi. Gadotsi, who looked around, finally learned about Wuming's whereabouts from a woman with a rather rosy face. Hyuga Hassan, who joined the search for Gadotsi, saw Gadotsi. After informing Cursed Wrist Hassan and Matthew, they all followed her. As for Da Vinci, he was just watching. Seeing so many people, Wuming simply stopped chatting with Gadotsi. Everyone, I have something to say. Wuming spoke. He was ready to explain what was going to happen next. Looking around at everyone, Wuming continued. I already have a preliminary plan. Chapter 750. Because of Wuming, everyone came to the residence of Gadotsi and others, ready to discuss Wuming's plan. Because of this, Bedivere did not clarify his identity to Gadotsi and others. But identity or not, it didn't matter to Gadotsi. Whether it was Lucius or Bedivere, they were all good people who helped them, weren't they? In the room, a stone round table was placed in the center of the room, which was created by Wuming with Create Green item. When he saw this table, Bedivere was shocked because, except for some details and patterns, this was exactly Camelot's round table. But because Bedivere was currently concealing his identity, he controlled his expression very well. Everyone sat around the round table, sitting on a stone seat with a backrest like a throne made by Wuming, waiting for Wuming, who was sitting at the head of the table, to speak. This made Bedivere a little helpless. Wuming completely recreated the round table, and those seats were where the knights of the round table sat. But Bedivere just thought about it in his heart and did not say it out loud. Da Vinci was a little interested in the stone seat he was sitting on and the round table in front of him. He looked around as if he wanted to observe these arts. Although Gadotsi was not as serious as Da Vinci, she was also very interested in these stone seats and round tables. On the other hand, 100 Faces Hassan and Cursed Wrist Hassan sat upright with serious expressions. Matthew, on the other hand, looked quite nervous. Matthew knew that his servant was Galahad, but he didn't know that the table in front of him was a round table. He just felt nervous subconsciously. It seemed that it was because of Galahad that caused Matthew to have such a timid appearance. First of all, Tachika, I'll leave this to you. Wuming looked at Gadotsi. Then, golden ripples appeared beside Wuming, and a golden cup emerged from the ripples. This is the Holy Grail. Matthew shouted excitedly. Except for Hassan, who had already seen it once, others were more or less surprised, especially Chaldea's group. There was no other reason, but the Holy Grail this time was too easy to obtain. This is what I got from the Sun King, this special Holy Grail. Wuming said and threw it to Gadotsi. Hey, Gadotsi caught the Holy Grail rather agilely. After experiencing this kind of catching movement several times, Gadotsi was no longer the child who was easily flustered at the beginning. Doctor, can you recover the Holy Grail? Gadotsi raised her arm and asked the bracelet on her wrist. In response, the bracelet made a sound. Just, wait a moment, because I didn't expect you. I need to wait a moment. However, Roman's voice gave people the feeling that he was flustered. Recovery is not urgent. Romani, can you identify this Holy Grail? Da Vinci said to the air. Although Da Vinci was not close to Gadotsi, Romani, who was monitoring the scene, still heard Da Vinci's words. Identification is still possible, I'll do it now. Roman's voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. With the bracelet and the Holy Grail in such a close distance, identification was not a problem. Da Vinci knew this, so he made this request to Roman. And Da Vinci asked Roman to identify the Holy Grail, not because he did not trust Wuming, but because it was a necessary process. It was always right to be cautious, and Wuming agreed with this point, so Wuming did not say anything. Identification is complete, it is indeed the Holy Grail, but... Roman seemed to want to say something, but he hesitated. However, Roman still said it out loud. Although it is the Holy Grail, it is still impossible to determine whether it is the Holy Grail that caused this singularity. Roman's tone was full of caution, as if he was afraid of offending people. Doctor, this is the Holy Grail that Senior Villo painstakingly obtained from the Sun King, how can you have doubts? Matthew righteously defended his senior. I believe in Assassin, since he said it is the Holy Grail of this singularity, then it must be. Gadotsi expressed her trust in Wuming. Ah, Romani is being targeted, Da Vinci laughed in schadenfreude. That's why I was considering whether to say it or not. Roman sighed helplessly. However, it is not unreasonable to be cautious, Roman having such a guess makes me happy. Seeing Roman so embarrassed and helpless, Wuming could not help but help him find a way out. Wuming changed his tone and continued to speak. However, whether this Holy Grail is the Holy Grail that caused this singularity or not, it has no impact on our next plan. Oh, did you find something unusual? Da Vinci looked at Wuming curiously. Wuming nodded as if it was a matter of course. The safety of this singularity is now in the hands of the Lion King, she has the power to destroy this singularity, and also the power to destroy this singularity. Because Artoria hid something from Wuming, Wuming guessed that what Artoria hid was the most important thing. Maybe it was related to the safety of this singularity. Indeed, in this way, whether this Holy Grail is the Holy Grail that caused this singularity or not is meaningless. Roman understood what Wuming meant. If this singularity was affected by the Lion King, then even if the Holy Grail was recovered, it would not be able to completely save this singularity. Others also understood this truth. Then what we need to do now is to defeat the Lion King. Bedivere asked. After all, if it was Artoria that caused this singularity, then it must be Bedivere's doing. Therefore, to defeat the king and bring the king back to the right path, he had to do his part. Although things are not completely clear yet, it is certain that we are currently hostile to the Lion King. Wuming did not answer Bedivere's question. In short, let's gather our forces first. Wuming's words made everyone realize. Indeed, other than Wuming who could fight, no one here could compete with the Knights of the Round Table one-on-one. Hassan was an assassin, Da Vinci was a magician, and Matthew was a defender. There was no way they could compete with the knights in frontal combat. My Skywing Legion can only be used as a one-time use joker card due to Fury, so we still lack a critical force. Wu-Ming said as he looked at cursed wrist Hassan. The critical force you are talking about, could it be? Seeing that cursed wrist Hassan understood what he meant, Wu-Ming smiled. Yes, it's what you think. Chapter 751. Excuse me. What exactly are Senior Villo and Mr. Cursing Wrist talking about? Matthew, being a curious child, asked. And the person who answered Matthew was Hundred Faces Hassan. They should be talking about the first Hassan. However, Hundred Faces Hassan seemed to be in a bad mood at the moment, and his words were a little harsh. Yes, the key force I'm talking about is the original Hassan, the first Hassan who is known as the King of Hassan. Wu-Ming nodded without delving into Hundred Faces Hassan's tone. Oh. Isn't that King Hassan? It feels so cool. Gadotzi leaned forward and looked at Wu-Ming with an excited look. Because the content of the previous discussion was not familiar to Hundred Faces Hassan and Cursing Wrist Hassan, the two of them did not interrupt before. But now that they were talking about things they were familiar with, Hundred Faces Hassan and Cursing Wrist Hassan began to explain to everyone. The first Hassan, that is the most mysterious Hassan. No one knows whether it is a man or a woman, and no one can catch its trace. Even the people who are targeted by the first Hassan may not be able to see it before they die. After Cursing Wrist Hassan finished speaking, everyone except Hundred Faces Hassan and Wu-Ming had a surprised expression. Doesn't that mean that the first Hassan's assassination technique has reached the point of being amazing? Matthew explained his understanding. At this time, on Gadotzi's bracelet, Roman and Chaldea also made a sound. Matthew's understanding is indeed correct. I checked the information and found that there are very few descriptions of the first Hassan in the information. Other than the simple, founder of the Elders of the Mountain and Hassan who killed Hassan, there are basically no other records. Ha! So mysterious. Matthew was stunned. This seemed to be a big shot. As a magician, Matthew clearly realized that the more mysterious something was, the more powerful it was. For such a mysterious first-generation Hassan, Mashu felt that the other party may be a super powerful person. Although I agree with Mashu's words, I'm more concerned about the Hassan who killed Hassan. Da Vinci suddenly said. Why? Gadotzi was puzzled. We'll have to answer that question, said Cursed Wrist Hassan. Knowing that Chaldea came from the future, Hassan the All-Seeing and Cursed Wrist Hassan were not surprised that the other party knew about Hassan's secret. Following Cursed Wrist Hassan's words, Hundred Faces Hassan continued. The so-called first Hassan who kills Hassan is because the first Hassan will behead the other Hassans when they go astray. Going astray. Matthew murmured thoughtfully. Continuing Hassan's words, Cursed Wrist Hassan said again. Although that's what they say, in reality, there are very few Hassans who have been beheaded by the first generation. After all, the Elders of the Mountain don't act for selfish reasons, so it's unlikely that we'll be beheaded by the first generation, Hassan the All-Seeing finally added. In other words, it was basically impossible to encounter them. Then how do we find the first Hassan? Gadotzi slumped on the table, looking powerless. After all, whether it was Roman's statement that the first Hassan was extremely mysterious, or Hassan the All-Seeing and Cursed Wrist Hassan's statement that it was almost impossible to meet them, it meant that the first Hassan was not easy to find. However, the corner of Wu-Ming's mouth began to twitch slightly. The first Hassan came to him and slashed him. So, we need Cursed Wrist Hassan's help, Wu-Ming said as he looked at Cursed Wrist Hassan. At the same time, everyone followed Wu-Ming's gaze and looked at Cursed Wrist Hassan, which made Cursed Wrist Hassan feel a little restrained. Just when Hassan the All-Seeing was about to say something, Cursed Wrist Hassan spoke before Hassan the All-Seeing could. I do know how to find the first Hassan. Cursed Wrist Hassan nodded. Seeing that Cursed Wrist Hassan spoke, Hassan the All-Seeing did not say anything else. In other words, as long as it's Hassan, he will definitely know this, Cursed Wrist Hassan continued. So, Hassan the All-Seeing also knows how to find the first Hassan. Gadotsi said, drawing inferences from one case. Yes, I can also find the first Hassan. Without any evasiveness or hesitation, Hassan the All-Seeing admitted it naturally. However, with Hassan the All-Seeing and Cursed Wrist Hassan's admission, the previous words of the first Hassan is difficult to find were a little bit of a slap in the face. As soon as they said that the first Hassan was difficult to find, Wuming revealed that Cursed Wrist Hassan could find the first Hassan, and Hassan the All-Seeing admitted that she could do it too. This made Gadotsi and Matthew speechless. Maybe there's something that's hard to say. Gadotsi and Matthew thought so in their hearts. Then, why did Senior Villo only point out Mr. Cursed Wrist Hassan and not Miss Hassan the All-Seeing? Matthew raised his hand and asked. The reason is simple. Cursed Wrist Hassan is a local, Wuming replied concisely. Gadotsi and Matthew could not understand this answer at all. Could it be that Hassan the All-Seeing was not a local? The local that Villo said, I'm afraid he doesn't refer to this area, but to this era, Da Vinci said. Da Vinci is right, because Cursed Wrist Hassan is a person of this era. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other, then looked at Cursed Wrist Hassan. Mr. Cursed Wrist Hassan, you should be a servant, right? Although Matthew was not very powerful, he could almost perceive the identity of Cursed Wrist Hassan. There was no doubt that he was a servant. Whether it was the spiritual form or the combat power comparable to a servant, it was solid evidence. I am indeed a servant, but this era is indeed my era, or the era not long after my death. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan did not understand one thing. How do you know about this? Cursed Wrist Hassan asked Wuming in a very respectful tone. Whether it was the powerful strength of Wuming that he heard from Gadotsi, or Wuming's ability to know Hassan's secret intelligence, Wuming was worthy of Cursed Wrist Hassan's respect. Wuming smiled slightly and answered Cursed Wrist Hassan's question. I know from the villagers. Cursed Wrist Hassan and All-Seeing Hassan were stunned, and then they understood. So that's how it is. So that's how it is. No wonder you have the assassin class adaptability. Even Da Vinci praised Wuming. However, not everyone understood, and there were still two people who did not understand. What the hell is going on? Don't keep us guessing. Gadotsi said unhappily. Only she and Matthew could not understand, and it was really uncomfortable. Cursed Wrist Hassan gave the answer. I'm afraid it's because of the villagers' conversation. Chapter 752. The villagers' conversation. What does that mean? Gadotsi was a little puzzled. Could it be that Wuming had tricked the villagers? Then, Wuming knocked her on the head. Ouch! Gadotsi shouted while holding her head. I'm not as bad as you think. Wuming explained. I only said that I accidentally heard about Cursed Wrist Hassan from the villagers when I was looking for Lucius. After all, the villagers did not have any entertainment facilities and were caught in the middle of a war. They could only chat to relieve their boredom. If the person he knew was powerful and kind, then there would be a lot of people talking about him. Wuming happened to hear something when he was looking for Lucius in the village. Through Wuming's own judgment and analysis, he came to the conclusion that Cursed Wrist Hassan was a local. I didn't ask at all. Wuming shrugged, indicating that he was innocent. However, Hundred-Face Hassan did not believe it. I don't think you can guess Cursed Wrist's identity from the villagers' chatter. So she directly expressed her disbelief. However, there would always be someone who believed it. And if the person involved believed it, then the others would have nothing to say. No, Hundred-Face, there is indeed such a possibility. Cursed Wrist shook his head at Hundred-Face Hassan, denying his doubts. After that, Hundred-Face Hassan did not say anything. Although she was a local, she was not from East Village where Cursed Wrist Hassan was from. As the host, Cursed Wrist Hassan was more right than she was. Cursed wrist Hassan himself knew that the villagers would talk about him from time to time, and he had inadvertently overheard the content of the discussion a few times. So, he was not surprised that Wu Ming could guess his identity. So, it's much more convenient for Hassan of this generation to lead the team to look for the first Hassan than someone who is not from this generation, isn't it? Wu Ming said as he glanced at hundred-face Hassan. Although Wu Ming didn't have much sarcasm, in Hassan's eyes, Wu Ming's glance was quite sarcastic. Humph. Out of sight, out of mind, Hassan turned his head away from Wu Ming. Seeing this, cursed wrist Hassan also knowingly diverted everyone's attention to the topic. Then, let me lead everyone to find the first Hassan. Hassan's body moved as if he wanted to say something, but after a slight struggle, he stopped. This was naturally reflected in Wu Ming's eyes. Coupled with Hundred Faces Hassan's hesitation and cursed wrist Hassan's concealment earlier, Wu Ming could tell that there must be something that was hard to say. Cursed wrist Hassan, where can I find the first Hassan? What's the price? This question stunned everyone. The first point wasn't a big deal, but the second point was the key point. Generally speaking, this kind of thing was discovered by oneself. Why did Wu Ming ask directly? Sometimes, Wu Ming still wanted to be a straightforward person. After all, being a detective was very taxing on his brain cells. In the mountains to the north, there's a Yazril temple. It's the holy land of the Hassans. Legend has it that the first Hassan has been sleeping in the temple, cursed wrist Hassan said, and could not help but look to the north. Hassan also spoke at this moment. Although it's a legend, we firmly believe that the first Hassan is sleeping there, Hassan said respectfully. Wu Ming nodded and then changed the topic. So, what's the price? Is it sacrificing the life of the current Hassan? Ha! Wu Ming's words made Gadotsi and Matthew exclaim in amazement. After all, the contrast was too great. To ask someone for help, one had to pay with one's life. Even if it was not one's own life, but someone else's life, in the eyes of Gadotsi and Matthew, this was not allowed. Is this true, cursed wrist Hassan? Gadotsi shouted cursed wrist Hassan's name with a serious expression. Because the leader of the old men in the mountains was Hassan Sabah, he could not be addressed as Hassan Sabah. After all, there were other Hassans. Therefore, cursed wrist Hassan said that it was fine to call himself cursed wrist Hassan. That was why Gadotsi called him that. Please tell us the truth, Mr. Cursed Wrist Hassan. As a polite and cute little eggplant, Matthew added honorifics. In desperation, cursed wrist Hassan could only nod. It's indeed as His Excellency Villo said. To seek the help of the first Hassan, one has to pay with the life of a Hassan, and that Hassan is me, the current Hassan. Is that really the case? Gadotsi was stunned. Then, how did Senior Villo know? Matthew looked at Wu Ming in confusion. I'm afraid it's because the first Hassan is the Hassan who killed Hassan. Da Vinci, who had been silent for a long time, spoke up. Da Vinci is right. In fact, you can understand it if you think about it carefully. Wu Ming nodded and motioned for Gadotsi and Matthew to think about it. The first Hassan would kill Hassan who had gone astray. If seeking the help of the first Hassan was considered going astray, then one Hassan would be killed. But the question was whether seeking the help of the first Hassan was going astray. Generally speaking, this should not be considered going astray. Matthew and Gadotsi thought so. However, the truth was sometimes so unexpected. Seeking the help of the first Hassan, in our opinion, is actually going astray. Hundred Faces Hassan regretfully stated the truth. If that's the case, if we seek the help of the first Hassan, wouldn't it be? Gadotsi said and looked at cursed wrist Hassan, who did not waver at all. Yes, we need to sacrifice cursed wrist Hassan. Hundred Faces Hassan nodded. This was also the reason why she hesitated before. In Hundred Faces Hassan's opinion, Wu Ming was already very powerful. It did not matter whether they sought the help of the first Hassan or not. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan had not seen Wu Ming's true ability, so when Wu Ming proposed to seek the help of the first Hassan, Cursed Wrist Hassan did not refuse. This is easy to handle. I have a way to solve this problem. Wu Ming smiled mysteriously. At this time, someone needed to make a statement. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other and nodded at the same time. We believe in the assassin, Senior Villo, the two said in unison. In that case, I'll believe in His Excellency Villo for once. Cursed Wrist Hassan chose to believe in Wu Ming, or rather, he chose to believe in the person that Chaldea's master trusted. I also want to see what the Villo has to do. Da Vinci naturally did not need to say much. In the end, only 100 Faces Hassan was left. Since Cursed Wrist Hassan has said so, what else can I do? 100 Faces Hassan nodded helplessly. Well, since the problem is solved, let's split up. Wu Ming nodded with satisfaction. Split up. 5 doubts filled everyone's mind. Chapter 753. Assassin, do you mean you're not going to work with us? Gadotsi looked at Wu Ming with some grievance. Initially, they thought they could come together, but in the end, they still had to separate. I'm sorry, Tachika. I have to save Serenity Hassan, who was captured by the Holy City. After all, time is of the essence, so splitting up is the best choice. Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi apologetically. Serenity Hassan. Gadotsi repeated Wu Ming's words. She did not know there was this Hassan. Is that so? You've already asked Sir Villo to save Serenity, 100 Faces. Cursed Wrist Hassan suddenly realized. This is what I asked Mr. Villo to do when I was in my village. 100 Faces Hassan explained who Serenity Hassan was and told everyone about his inference that Serenity Hassan was still alive. Because we still have compatriots to take care of, plus the place where Serenity is at is heavily guarded, we dare not act rashly for a while. Listening to Cursed Wrist Hassan's words, it seemed that he and 100 Faces Hassan had already begun to formulate a plan to rescue Serenity. And it just so happened that 100 Faces Hassan met me, so he asked me to meet Serenity Hassan. Wu Ming did not mention the misunderstanding between him and 100 Faces Hassan. He just gave a simple ending. I see. Gadotsi wasn't an unreasonable girl, so he nodded his head in understanding. I know, I will definitely complete the mission you gave me, assassin. Assassin, you have to work hard on your side too. She clenched her little fist and cheered for Wu Ming. Don't worry, I'm Villo there answered. Nothing will happen. Wu Ming reached out his hand and gave a thumbs up to Gadotsi in the void. Gadotsi also reached out her hand and gave a thumbs up in the void with a knowing smile. Then I'll leave it to you, Your Excellency Villo. I'll provide you with the specific information, Cursed Wrist Hassan thanked him. Okay, then I'll thank you in advance. Wu Ming nodded in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Although he only needed to tell Wu Ming where the location was, Hassan also thought so he did not prepare any information for Wu Ming. However, since someone was willing to help, Wu Ming wouldn't refuse the other party's request, so he simply agreed. Then, I'll be in charge of rescuing Serenity Hassan. Tachika, Matthew, and Lucius will be in charge of going to the Yazril temple with Cursed Wrist Hassan and Baijiu Hassan. That's it. Wu Ming stood up and prepared to end the meeting. How sad, my dear Villo, are you going to abandon Da Vinci just like that? Da Vinci, who wasn't assigned a mission, complained. This made Wu Ming feel somewhat helpless. You're a caster, after all. It's better for you to stay here. Wu Ming smiled helplessly. And the villagers also need someone to protect them. If the servants leave, it'll be bad if there's any danger. For example, they would be discovered by the knights. After all, the West Village was still guarded by Abanti, whom Gopril and Baijiu Hassan didn't know about. As for the East Village, once they all left, then no one could provide protection for the villagers. Although Wuming would also let Azrael stay to protect the village secretly, Azrael was currently a secret chess piece, so he had to let one of her servants stay behind. I'm a genius. Maybe I can help. After all, climbing a mountain is very tiring. Tachika is just an ordinary human. She should need transportation, and it can also speed up. Da Vinci said a series of benefits for him to go. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan immediately refuted. Unfortunately, on the way to the Yazril temple, you are not allowed to take transportation. That is disrespectful to the first generation. Even Da Vinci was stunned by Cursed Wrist Hassan's sudden slap in the face. The main reason was that the road between them was so rugged that many people who took transportation fell off the cliff and died because of instability. That was why this rule was extended. But if you don't want to take transportation, you can follow me. Cursed Wrist Hassan's words made Da Vinci react instantly. Okay, no problem. Da Vinci smiled and replied quickly. This made Wuming feel helpless. But Da Vinci didn't mind. It wouldn't affect him anyway, probably. In that case, I won't go. Mr. Villo is right. Someone has to stay behind to protect the villagers. So let me stay here to protect the villagers. At this time, Baijiu Hassan suddenly spoke. After all, as long as it was Hassan, he would know where the Yazril temple was, so only one Hassan was needed to lead everyone to the Yazril temple. And if he was punished by the first Hassan, only Cursed Wrist Hassan, the current generation Hassan, would be punished. So it didn't matter if Baijiu Hassan went or not. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan spoke once. You don't have to worry about that. There is another servant in this village. Cursed Wrist Hassan reminded him. When Cursed Wrist Hassan said that, Baijiu Hassan understood. I forgot about that person. Because he didn't come here often, and that person didn't appear in the village, Baijiu Hassan forgot about him. That person. Who is it? Wuming was puzzled because he didn't find any other servant's magical power in the village, including now. Wuming released his spirit sense and covered the entire village. Except for the servants in this house, there were no other servants in the village. You can't perceive that person's magical power because he is not in the village, dear Villo. After all, it was Castor, and Da Vinci perceived Wuming's spirit sense. Not in the village. Wuming was relieved. In that case, it was not surprising that Wuming couldn't perceive the servant's aura. That person took some villagers to the mountains to hunt today. Gadotsi said with a smile. After all, there is not much food now. That person will take the villagers to the mountains from time to hunt. Matthew echoed. Although it was a war, there were still many wild animals in the mountains. However, because of the singularity, those beasts were fierce, so they needed servants to lead the team to hunt. So, who is that person? Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This group of people just didn't say the servant's name. It was definitely a temporary idea to play with him. This was Wuming's judgment. In the end, it was the most honest, Cursed Wrist Hassan who said the servant's real name. The servant's rank is archer, and his real name is Arash Kamango, a great hero of the ancient Persian Empire. Chapter 754. Because he was acting alone, Wuming left first. Gadotsi and the others were going to wait for Arash, who went out to hunt with the villagers, to come back and explain before going out, so Gadotsi and the others stayed in the village. Between the mountains, Wuming used his telekinesis to fly in the air and headed south. After leaving East Village for some distance, Wuming found a mountaintop similar to a cliff and stopped. I remember that Arash is a hero who can tear the earth with an arrow, but the price seems to be the shattering of his body. Wuming thought about the information of the great hero along the way. Although Wuming could also wait for Arash to come back and meet him before leaving, there was no need for that. After all, there would be opportunities in the future. Thinking of opportunities, Wuming thought of smoky drunk Hassan. His first meeting with smoky drunk Hassan was the last meeting. At that time, Wuming also thought that there was still a chance. I'm not a jinx. Wuming shook his head self-deprecatingly. As a matter of fact, it was inevitable for smoky drunk Hassan to make such a decision. It was a pity that he could not see him again. Wuming had a good impression of Hassan, who was willing to sacrifice his life to stall Tristan. However, the other party had left. Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Then, he looked in the direction of the cliff. He sensed someone there. Azrael. After Wuming said that, an angel floated up from the bottom of the cliff. It's me, Master. The newcomer was naturally the green-haired Azrael. Azrael's special skill played a big role. So far, she had not shown any signs of losing her mind. It seemed that the ability of the Skywing commander brought about resistance to the violent power. Azrael bowed her head respectfully, her wings half spread, and floated in the air, but her body was one position lower than Wuming. You've worked hard, Azrael. You've completed the task I gave you very well. After all, she was his subordinate, and she was also a cute girl. Wuming naturally wouldn't be stingy with his praise. Master, are you blaming me for not saving that smoke-drunk Hassan? Azrael suddenly asked. Wuming shook his head. The death of a servant is not a real death, and you did it to complete my mission. You did the right thing. Therefore, Wuming did not overreact to the death of drunk smoke Hassan. Moreover, Azrael's actions proved that she was completely under Wuming's command. She would not try to act smart, which was similar to the NPCs in Nazalek. However, being too loyal and inflexible was also what gave Wuming a headache. Of course, I hope you can try to be flexible. When Wuming left Dongji village, he got a lot of information from drunk smoke Hassan about a prison tower that imprisoned tranquil Hassan. However, when handing over the information, Wuming inadvertently heard a sentence from cursed wrist Hassan. It would be great if Smoke Drunk didn't leave. Her stealth ability is the best among us, Hassan. It was no wonder that drunk Smoke Hassan chose to sneak into the holy city. It was not arrogance, but the truth. Although the ending was that he took the initiative to expose himself and sacrificed himself to cover the refugees. At that time, Wuming actually wanted to complain. Why did drunk Smoke Hassan always want to sacrifice himself to cover others' escape? Ahem, back to the topic, if Azrael saved drunk Smoke Hassan at that time, then they would have one more stealth expert to help them. Of course, I'm not blaming you. I just hope you don't lose the right to think for yourself because you want to fully express your loyalty. Servants who needed to be loyal to a new master would generally fully obey the master's orders in order to gain the master's trust. However, there was no need for that. He believed in the loyalty of the Skywing species. A person who was loyal enough to listen to the master's orders and indirectly killed her master, and it was done knowingly. One could imagine the loyalty of the Skywing species. Azrael did think so, and she was afraid that Wuming could not see that she wanted to show her loyalty, so she deliberately showed it. I still prefer to talk to Gabriel. I like partners more than servants. Although Gabriel also gave her loyalty to Wuming, she was more casual in front of Wuming than Azrael. Well, my master, I will change, meow. Azrael flapped her wings, smiled at Wuming, and put on her quirky tone again. Then, please continue to stay here, whether in Dongji village or with Tachika and the others. This time, Wuming only gave a vague order, and it was up to Azrael to decide what to do. Master. Don't you need me to go with you to carry out the rescue plan, meow? Azrael asked with concern. Although she knew that Wuming would be fine if he went alone and would definitely succeed, how could she be lazy and let her master do things for her? It's too extravagant for the two of us to go. Just complete the task I gave you. After all, Wuming was not someone who cared about his reputation. He was not someone who would let his subordinates do things first. In Wu Ming's opinion, splitting up to act was the most time-saving. Yes, master. May I know what little Kishi is doing now? Meow. Osriel flew in front of Wu Ming. Although she let go, she still did not lose the respect she should have. I ordered her to monitor and protect Dongji village with a bot, Wu Ming answered truthfully. Protecting the village is boring. Little Kishi is probably bored out of her wits, meow, Osriel laughed gloatingly. I'm not going to stay in the village. I'm going with those monkeys, humans, to meet that first Hassan, meow. Every skywing had a restless heart, and Osriel was no exception. But be careful. While you weren't around, the first Hassan infiltrated a bot, Wu Ming reminded her. Master. Did that first Hassan hurt you? Osriel was rather nervous. After all, in her opinion, it was her incompetence for someone to infiltrate the headquarters while she was away. After all, she was the commander of the Skywings. If her mistress was hurt, then Osriel would not tolerate it even more. I'm fine with some minor injuries, but he's not someone you can deal with, so you must be careful. Wu Ming looked at Osriel gravely, afraid that the first Hassan would cut down Osriel's violent temper. After all, Osriel was a berserker. Although she was not that irritable, Osriel was still easily irritable. Taking a deep breath, Osriel calmed down. Understood, master. I'll be flying high up in the sky. I'll be very cautious, meow. Smiling and bowing to Wu Ming, Osriel flapped her wings and flew into the sky. Then, I should be going. Wu Ming had not been idle while chatting with Osriel. He had been using his psychic power to explore the path ahead, and he had already reached the vicinity of the prison tower. Extending his psychic power there meant that Wu Ming had been there, so the teleportation gate could be used. With that, Wu Ming snapped his fingers, and a dark purple ripple engulfed Wu Ming. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the mountain crevices could be heard. There was no one in sight. Chapter 755. Night gradually fell, and the stars surged into the sky. The moonlight tonight was not very good, and the moon was somewhat obscured by large dark clouds. On the barren land without moonlight, there was not the slightest vitality, no plants, no animals, all of it was lifeless soil, or the land that was hard and cold like iron. On this steel-like land, a black facility shaped like a prison castle was located here. The black walls merged with the dark night as if rooted in the darkness, and complemented the steel-like barren land. On the castle, mass-produced solemn knights were holding torches, patrolling the walls, monitoring the surroundings, and basically every blind spot had a solemn knight standing guard. Through the light of the fire, it could be seen that the solemn knights were all fully armed to the head, and the serious and somewhat ugly helmets could not let others see their faces clearly. The same type of armor, plus their orderly patrolling, standing guard, and changing shifts, if one only looked at the appearance, it really looked like mass-produced. And mass-produced also had its advantages, that was, there would not be many accidents, and the fact was indeed so. So far, no accidents had happened here, even when the sky was dark to this extent. But this stability was about to be broken at this moment. In a corner, two knights were changing shifts. The knight who changed shifts left, and the knight who changed shifts replaced the knight who left and stood guard there. After the knight who changed shifts walked away, the knight who changed shifts fell straight back as if he had fainted. If he fell, the sound of armor hitting the ground would definitely attract the attention of others. But Wu Ming would not let this happen. Wu Ming, who was hiding in the shadow behind the unconscious knight, held the knight who was stunned by his magic release, gently lifted him, put him in the shadow of the blind spot, and gently put him on the ground. Then, Wu Ming pointed in the air, and the high-level tool creation skill was activated. A black cloth appeared out of thin air and covered the knight on the ground. Because it was a blind spot, plus the shadow, and Wu Ming's black cloth as a cover, it was basically impossible to be discovered. Now, I'm going to sneak in, Wu Ming said, and a black cloak like Hassan appeared on Wu Ming's body. From now on, he would sneak in. It could only be said that there was still a shortage of manpower, and at least 2 knights should be arranged in the blind spot. However, there was only one solemn knight standing guard in the corner of the castle. Wasn't this giving Wu Ming an opportunity to take advantage of? At first, Wu Ming, who arrived not far from the prison castle through the portal, began to explore all kinds of intelligence about the prison castle. First of all, there was no enchantment around the prison castle. So Wu Ming easily slipped up the wall, and he was ready to sneak from the top. After hiding for a while, Silent Wonder figured out how the knights would change shifts. After that knight finished changing shifts, Silent Wonder knocked out the knight and replaced him as the night sentry. According to Wu Ming's observation, the guard in this blind spot changed every half an hour. In other words, from now on, no one would pay attention to this place for at least half an hour. In other words, Wu Ming had half an hour to do whatever he wanted. Then, it was time for Wu Ming to sneak in. After waiting for a while to make sure that this blind spot would not be noticed by others, Wu Ming did not stay any longer. Wu Ming directly used the high-level tool creation to create a puppet with only the appearance of the solemn knight, and the real solemn knight would not wake up for a while. Wu Ming was merciful that the guy was not shocked to death by the magic released. Without a few hours or intense stimulation, the guy would not wake up. After finishing the preparation, Wu Ming put on the black cloak and quietly left along the wall of the building. After all, there was only one entrance to the lower level, so Wu Ming naturally knew where to go. Avoiding the patrolling solemn knight, Wu Ming quietly entered from the entrance of the tower and came to a corridor that could lead to the lower level of the castle. In order to avoid being blocked in the corridor, Wu Ming used his mental power to support the soles of his feet and ran through the corridor without making the slightest sound. Because of the chaos, it was impossible for the holy city to have many people. Plus, this location was remote, so there were not many people inside the castle. At least, this was what Wu Ming saw so far. At least Wu Ming did not see many solemn knights along the way. Even if he did, Wu Ming could rely on his own skills to avoid them. It had to be said that the construction of this prison castle was exactly the same as the prison castle in Camelot. Wu Ming even felt like he was back at home, cough cough. In short, Wu Ming knew his destination, where was the prison room where the prisoners were kept. After all, he was also a Knight of the Round Table. Soon, Wu Ming came to an entrance to the lower level. Hiding in the corner, Wu Ming saw 2 solemn knights holding spears at the entrance. In front of him was the entrance where the prisoners were detained. If it was in this castle, then Quiet Hassan would be in the prison room at this entrance. After finding Quiet Hassan, Wu Ming could rely on the portal to save her. So, it was better to be reckless now. Wu Ming picked up a stone and threw it in the opposite direction where he was. The 2 solemn knights looked over subconsciously. At this moment, the mental power attached to the soles of his feet burst out suddenly. Wu Ming rushed to the 2 solemn knights like a missile. The 2 solemn knights obviously realized that something was wrong, and they also saw someone attacking them, but their body's reaction speed could not keep up with their thoughts. Wu Ming, who rushed to the front of the 2 knights in an instant, pressed his hands on the heads of the 2 solemn knights, and magic power suddenly released. What? Before one of the knights could finish speaking, he was stunned by Wu Ming's magic power. The other solemn knight, who did not have time to speak, naturally fainted earlier. Wu Ming threw the 2 solemn knights casually, and the 2 solemn knights were swallowed by the black and purple ripples. In one corner, the black and purple ripples spat out the 2 and piled them together like garbage. Looking at the adults in the prison room, Wu Ming gently patted the non-existent dust on his hands. After all, there was no need to be careful. Moreover, Wu Ming did not feel that this door was safe. On the contrary, this door was probably the most dangerous place in this prison castle. With one hand extended, the spear of the unconscious solemn knight was sucked into the palm of Wu Ming's hand with his mental power. Wu Ming held the spear and aimed at the door, and magic began to gather on this ordinary spear. Then, the spear was thrown out by Wu Ming. Whoosh, boom. The entire prison castle shook violently. Chapter 756. Boom. The entire prison tower shook because of Wu Ming's throw. The solemn knights on the tower panicked a little. Although there was no commander to command them, after a moment of panic, the solemn knights automatically gathered in an orderly manner and headed toward the source of the tremor, the prison in the castle. At the door of the prison room, Wu Ming pondered and picked up the broken stone that splashed at his feet. A magic shielding enchantment. Wu Ming saw the traces of a magic enchantment attached to the broken stone. Attached to these walls were enchantments that could completely shield magic. Although this enchantment was very ordinary, it was very practical. However, this enchantment was said to shield magic, but it was more like hiding magic. When setting up a magic trap or something, with this enchantment, the enemy would not be able to detect the magic on the magic trap and thus would not be able to discover the trap. Of course, to deal with a magician, non-magic traps could also be set up. To put it simply, it was a trap created by the knowledge brought about by the development of science and technology. However, such a trap was basically useless against people like Wu Ming, although magic traps were unlikely to work against Wu Ming. However, this magic shielding enchantment was not used to hide the trap. The other party knew that the trap would not be able to do anything to Wu Ming, so this enchantment was used to hide the person hiding in the prison room. Wu Ming casually threw away the broken stone in his hand and then looked at the smashed door. The door was completely broken, and even the walls around the door had a lot of cracks. The broken stone that splashed at Wu Ming's feet was part of this broken wall. Wu Ming's throw accurately hit the target he wanted to hit. Although this blow caused a lot of smoke and the situation inside could not be seen clearly, Wu Ming did not need to see clearly. After breaking the door, Wu Ming extended his mental strength to see the situation inside. A large number of fully armed solemn knights, and a knight of the round table that Wu Ming was familiar with, agronomen. This was what the other party was hiding. A fully armed, battle-hardened solemn knight, as well as a knight of the round table, iron agronomen. Unlike the solemn knights on the tower outside, the armor and weapons of these solemn knights were attached to magic. If these things were called magic attire in the magic world, it would be a very advanced magic attire. Is this Guinevere's work? Not to mention that Wu Ming could recognize these things that were transformed by Guinevere. Among the knights of the round table, only Merlin, Guinevere, and Morgan were high-grade magicians. Morgan and Merlin were not here, only Guinevere was here. These magic attires undoubtedly came from Guinevere's work. Although Guinevere was a berserker, it was not impossible for him to read as a berserker and write as a caster. Even Soundless was able to read Saber's assassin and infiltrate berserker, so what else was impossible? In Wu Ming's view, even Ramses II's sudden betrayal was possible. That was why Wu Ming asked Gadotsi and the others to invite the first Hassan. When Wu Ming was distracted, the sound of arrows piercing through the atmosphere came into Wu Ming's ears. Shaking his head, he pulled himself back from the distraction. Wu Ming stretched out one hand, and the meteor's silver was spat out from the golden ripples and fell into Wu Ming's hand. Wu Ming held it tightly. Then, Wu Ming swung his sword violently, and the magic sword aura swept across and shot down all the arrows from the prison room. By the way, Wu Ming's sword aura also blew away the surrounding smoke and dust. Wu Ming saw the inside of the prison room. This door was just the main door, and there was a very empty hall inside. There was a wide corridor inside, and there were rows of prisons where prisoners were held. Wu Ming was not familiar with this structure. It must have been remodeled when the prison castle was built. The purpose was obvious, that was, Wu Ming's current situation. A row of knights with bow and arrow magic attire lined up in the hall, maintaining the posture of bow and arrow. There was no doubt that the attack just now was launched by them. In the back row, there was a team of knights with spears, and all of them were also wearing high-level magic attire. Behind them, there was a Gwaun in black armor, and a row of knights with a knight's greatsword. Similarly, those knights' greatsword were also magic attire. Although it was completely incomparable with Wu Ming's meteor silver, it was already a very powerful weapon for ordinary servants or humans. There was no doubt that those troops led by Aguawan were a team of special forces. After all, even Guinevere couldn't always make magic attire for the knights, so those magic attire were very small. At least Wu Ming didn't see them in the sacred city. Although there was also the possibility that they were hidden, Wu Ming believed that this was a special force. If it was an ordinary servant, after dealing with the guard knights, they would definitely enter the prison to save people. In that case, the first wave of arrows just now was likely to be unstoppable. Of course, if you had a blood-stained armor, an invincible golden armor, an immortal demigod body, or something like that, you could naturally resist the attack. However, Wu Ming didn't go in at all. The number of people in the prison castle was pitifully small, and the defense was very similar to a trap. How could there not be an ambush? If someone didn't know about the Knights of the Round Table, they might think that the number of people patrolling the castle was quite normal, but as a member of the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming had already seen that something was wrong. He didn't know about other knights, but among the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming knew that the prison was not strictly guarded, but it was impossible to arrange such a number of people. What's more, there were servants here. Even if the terrain was remote, it was impossible to send so many people. Therefore, only by setting up an ambush, in Wu Ming's view, was the most correct answer. However, that was just Wu Ming's guess, but the javelin just now proved that what he thought was correct. He didn't know whether Aguawan got the news or guessed that someone would come to save people. Anyway, he had already set up an ambush in advance. If it was Hassan, maybe he would be buried under this special force, but unfortunately, the person who came today was Wu Ming. Vilo Theranciad. Aguawan frowned. Through his expression, Wu Ming could see that he really didn't expect the person who came was Wu Ming. In other words, the information collected by Hassan was actually deliberately leaked by Aguawan, waiting for Hassan to fall into the trap. Again, it was Wu Ming who came today. As a result, Aguawan's plan was completely disrupted. Chapter 757. It was not that Wu Ming was bragging. Even if these knights were equipped with the powerful magic attire made by Guinevere, they were still no match for Wu Ming. Learning martial arts from the Queen of the Infernal Realm, honing his martial arts skills for more than 10 years, or even decades, as well as powerful noble phantasm and unimaginable magic power, Aguawan and his special troops were nothing more than decorations. If it were not for the fact that Wu Ming did not know if the target he needed to rescue this time, quiet Hassan, was there, Wu Ming would definitely use the meteor silver to launch a light cannon. In that case, these solemn nights would basically be finished. It could not be helped. A sealed hall with an opening was like a secret room, and if Wu Ming released his noble phantasm at the opening, it was equivalent to a bomb exploding in the secret room. Wu Ming's bomb was not an ordinary bomb. If Wu Ming completely released his noble phantasm, it would be a bomb on the level of a nuclear bomb. The result would be that the prison castle would be directly shattered, and not even dregs would be left. However, Wu Ming did not know if the target he needed to rescue this time was still in the prison castle, so Wu Ming would not do that. Moreover, Wu Ming sneaked in, so how could he make such a big movement like a nuclear bomb explosion? Wu Ming looked at Aguawan's appearance, and it did not seem like he was going to turn a blind eye. However, after all, both of them were once colleagues at the Round Table, so Wu Ming would not immediately make a move. I didn't expect to see you here, Aguawan. Wu Ming took the lead in greeting. When the solemn knights saw Wu Ming greeting their commander, they all looked at each other. It was someone they knew, so should they still attack? The king's order has already been issued. Vilo Theranciad is the enemy. You don't have to hold back, Aguawan said with a gloomy face. The solemn knights did not know Wu Ming, so they did not have any definite feeling about Wu Ming's identity as a former knight of the Round Table. Therefore, after Aguawan gave the order, the solemn knights at the forefront with bows and arrows immediately released their fully drawn bows and arrows. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the arrows cut through the air and rushed at Wu Ming at an extremely fast speed. However, all of this was useless. Wu Ming just gently waved his sword, and all the arrows that attacked Wu Ming were all deflected. Tisk. Aguin gritted his teeth and frowned. He naturally knew that these solemn knights were no threat to Wu Ming, but he still did not want to give up. Because he was unwilling. All of you, stand down. But what could he do? If this continued, these special solemn knights would be completely annihilated. And as long as they did not attack Wu Ming, according to Aguin's understanding of Wu Ming, he would not attack. The solemn knights completely obeyed Aguin's order and immediately stood up and retreated. However, Aguin did not move. But it was clear that he did not want to sit down and have a good talk with Wu Ming, because Aguin pulled out his sword. There was no doubt that the solemn knights could not deal with Wu Ming, so Aguin was ready to personally attack. The solemn knights were a special force trained by Aguin to deal with servants. They could not be defeated by Wu Ming, so Aguin chose to let them retreat. But he could not retreat because Aguin's anger toward Wu Ming was burning fiercely. It seems that you are not ready to have a good talk with me. Wu Ming shook his head regretfully. Although it was futile for Aguin to personally attack, not to mention that Aguin's face was full of anger at the moment. But as a knight, Wu Ming respected Aguin's choice. So Wu Ming also raised his sword, Meteor Silver. Without saying much, Aguin made the first move. It was a powerful slash, which gave people the feeling that Aguin was not a knight, but a berserker. Wu Ming received the attack. Aguin's attack was indeed powerful, but Wu Ming was stronger. However, Wu Ming did not attack, but used Meteor Silver to constantly defend. Bang, 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 Aguin held his sword and kept attacking. Wu Ming used Meteor Silver to constantly defend. One moved forward, the other moved backward. The two swords collided with each other and made a sound. What made you so angry, Aguin? Wu Ming asked while defending. Of course it's you. Vilo tharanched. Aguin roared, raised his sword and slashed at Wu Ming with more force than before. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rose by dozens of decibels, and Wu Ming felt a little uncomfortable. On the other hand, Aguin's ear was slightly bleeding. Whether it's Guy, Gaholis, Moranduk, or Percival, they can all betray the king, but only you. The king's closest knight. Vilo tharanched. Only you can't betray the king. Aguin seemed a little crazy at this moment, like a berserker. You are the one who has been with the king since the beginning. The person the king needs the most is none other than you. But you betrayed the king. Aguin's mind was becoming more and more abnormal. His words were filled with respect for Wu Ming, but also resentment for Wu Ming. Wu Ming sighed. He understood why Aguin became like this. Artoria was indeed the first person that Agrippan got close to, and he was greatly influenced by her. However, because he was a modern person, he showed a lot of advanced ideas. Therefore, Wu Ming's influence on Agrippan was also great. Aguin was extremely loyal to Artoria, but he also admired Wu Ming. As everyone knew, the Knights of the Round Table were fans of Artoria, but at the same time, they were also fans of Wu Ming or Vilo tharanched. The other Knights of the Round Table were very obvious, but there were also some who were not. Aguin was such an example. However, if he had to choose between Wu Ming and Artoria, Aguin would undoubtedly choose Artoria's side. But this did not mean that he could turn a blind eye to the person he admired, especially when that person was the person the king he was loyal to needed. And now, the two people he admired and believed in were standing on opposite sides. How could he not go crazy? You need to calm down, Aguin, Wu Ming said. After all, they were good friends who had worked together for many years. Wu Ming naturally cared about the Knights of the Round Table. Agawin's eyes were bloodshot, and his ears were bleeding. He roared at Wu Ming, "I am calm. Those who are not loyal to the king are traitors. Even if it's Lord Varen, I'll kill him for you to see." With that, Agawin rushed forward again. Seeing Agawin like this, Wu Ming did not say anything. Now, he could only defeat him. Chapter 758. X-Liver. Following the activation of True Name release, the blade of meteor silver glowed with a pure silver light. The huge amount of magic power caused the solemn knights not far away to feel fear. The mana released from his body was instantly compressed and condensed on the holy sword. Like a flash bomb, no one could look directly at it. Wu Ming swung the holy sword horizontally at Agawin who was attacking him. Light flashed, and Agawin's knight sword shattered. Even Agawin's armor was completely shattered. Pfft. Agawin coughed out blood and half-knelt in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming did not kill Agawin. He could not and did not need to. Wu Ming also half-knelt and looked at Agawin. "If I accept Artoria's summon, you will lose. I will lead Guy and the others to defeat Artoria." Wu Ming looked at Agawin with bloodshot eyes and messy hair. He looked like he was about to die. Ahem. Agawin was a little agitated by Wu Ming and coughed twice. Agawin understood what Wu Ming meant. He was saying that it was unwise for Agawin to fight him alone. Wu Ming was the strongest among the Knights of the Round Table. Although Gawain and Lancelot could fight against Wu Ming, they were still no match for him. No matter in terms of strength, speed, durability, or magic power, the other Knights of the Round Table were no match for Wu Ming, who was the Origin Dragon. Although it didn't have any obvious advantages, the Origin Dragon gave Wu Ming an inconspicuous change that transcended nature. However, Wu Ming's words also implied that he would drag Artoria down from the Lion King's throne. "I didn't try to kill you, but you can't fight right now. You should take a good rest." Wu Ming stood up and walked around Agawin. When Wu Ming arrived behind Agawin suddenly spoke. "Wait a minute." Due to his weak state, Agawin could not turn his head. He could only lower his head and ask. Wu Ming turned around and looked at Agawin. "Lord Villo. Why? Why do you want to make an enemy out of my king?" However, Wu Ming only smiled at this. "I never said that I want to be Artoria's enemy. I just don't want Artoria to walk on a difficult path." In her current form, Artoria chose to preserve the human specimens and destroy the villains for the sake of mankind. No matter the Knights of the Round Table, such as Guy, who chose to stand against Artoria, or the Knights of the Round Table who chose to stand on Artoria's side, as a knight, they were against the idea of eliminating the majority and protecting the minority. However, the knights who chose to stand on Artoria's side, such as Gawain, did so out of loyalty. Compared to protecting the people, serving the king and making up for their regrets was a better choice. Therefore, King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table became the Lion King's Knights of the Round Table. Purely from the perspective of protecting the people, Artoria chose the right path. However, Wu Ming had a better choice. This choice was better for both Artoria and the people. Helping Chaldea and restoring the people was Wu Ming's choice. The path of saving the people was finished by him. There was no need for Artoria to bear the burden. If there was a happy ending, why would he choose the path of bad end? Therefore, Wu Ming stood on the opposite side of the Lion King as an ally. "Didn't you say that the person Artoria needs the most is me? Therefore, I will never betray her. I just chose to walk on the path of betrayal in your eyes." However, more importantly, Wu Ming had to find out what Artoria was hiding from him. Of course, the premise of all this was that Ramses II did not lie. "By the way, the new force is mine. Soon, we will launch an attack on the Holy City. Be prepared, Agronomen." After saying that, Wu Ming walked into the prison. As for Agronomen, after hearing Wu Ming's words, he fainted and lay on the ground. The knights were afraid of Wu Ming because of Wu Ming's previous performance. In addition, their commander, Agronomen, had fainted. Therefore, the knights did not move. They were even a little scared. Seeing such knights, Wu Ming shook his head helplessly. Send Agronomen back to the holy city. Tell him that you met me. The Lion King will not blame you. Yes. The knights responded. Then, they carried the unconscious Agronomen and hurriedly left in the direction of the gate. Wu Ming shook his head again. He was disappointed with these knights. Although it was irrational to fight against an enemy who was obviously unbeatable, listening to Wu Ming, who seemed to be an enemy at the moment, was there something wrong? However, Wu Ming did not think too much about it. What he needed to do now was to save Quiet Hassan. Walking to the prison corridor, Wu Ming did not find anyone in the cells on both sides of the corridor, but after thinking about it carefully, the villains must have been killed. Judging from the magic emitted by the prison facilities here, it was estimated that this place was only used to imprison servants. I forgot to ask where Quiet Hassan is. Wu Ming made a mistake. However, the felons should be in the innermost part. With that in mind, Wu Ming walked to the deepest part of the prison corridor. A two-person tall door appeared in front of Wu Ming. Without hesitation, Wu Ming pushed the door and walked in. As soon as he entered, he saw a huge cylindrical pit, but the depth of the huge pit was not high, but the diameter was quite long. A stone staircase spiraled down the edge of the huge pit. It seemed to be a staircase leading to the bottom. However, because it was not deep, Wu Ming saw the bottom at a glance. In the center of the bottom, a wooden cross stood there, which was used to tie people up. On the cross, a scarred body was hung on it. It was a purple-haired girl wearing a tight black suit and a skull mask. That should be Quiet Hassan. Wu Ming thought so. With a light leap, Wu Ming jumped down from the huge pit and landed steadily in front of Quiet Hassan. Quiet Hassan did not move at all, but Wu Ming was still keenly aware that a gaze was looking at him, but it immediately moved away. Wu Ming looked at his armor. He was afraid that Quiet Hassan thought he was a knight of the holy city. He touched the armor and changed into ordinary Middle Eastern clothes, then Wu Ming spoke. I'm here to save you on Hassan's request. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Quiet Hassan's eyes lit up. Later, Wu Ming waved the meteor silver, and the chain wrapped around Quiet Hassan broke, and Quiet Hassan fell from the cross. Wu Ming subconsciously reached out and hugged Quiet Hassan. However, at this moment, Quiet Hassan squeezed out a trace of strength and spoke weakly. No. Chapter 759. But to be honest, if it weren't for Wu Ming's good ears and being close enough to Quiet Hassan, Wu Ming might not have been able to hear Quiet Hassan's words. Such a weak and incomparably weak voice, coupled with the injuries on Quiet Hassan's body, it seemed that Quiet Hassan was tortured by Abdadi. As for Quiet Hassan's no, Wu Ming naturally knew why. Cursed Wrist Hassan had given Wu Ming information that Quiet Hassan's entire body was highly toxic, whether it was his skin, hair, or even body fluids. Ordinary people would die as soon as they touched him, and even servants might not be able to resist Quiet Hassan's poison. Therefore, Cursed Wrist Hassan told Wu Ming that he should not easily come into contact with Quiet Hassan. However, as the root dragon, Wu Ming was naturally not afraid of any poison, even if it was the body of a servant. Otherwise, why would Wu Ming cheat on the body of a servant? However, Quiet Hassan was also a girl. Since she said no, Wu Ming would not force her. Spirit power was launched, and Quiet Hassan was suspended in the air at a very close distance from Wu Ming. Sigh. Quiet Hassan was obviously puzzled by his current state. Don't be afraid, this is my ability. Wu Ming said, spreading his hands, and his body naturally flew up, just like Quiet Hassan. The embodiment of spirit power is a good choice to control the flight of objects. Oh, Quiet Hassan was a little overwhelmed. He didn't know if it was because he was too weak, but Quiet Hassan seemed a little absent-minded. "By the way, I'm not afraid of your poison," Wu Ming finally emphasized. "Ha!" Quiet Hassan was taken aback, but then he returned to normal. "Maybe he has the ability to resist poison, but in the face of my poison, I'm afraid it won't have much effect." Quiet Hassan thought so, and finally dispelled the fantasy in his mind. Were you really invited here by Baitsu?" Immediately after, Quiet Hassan asked. After all, when Wu Ming came in, Quiet Hassan clearly saw that Wu Ming was wearing the holy city's armor, and it was not mass-produced, but similar to the unique armor of the Knights of the Round Table. Moreover, it was always right to be cautious. As an assassin, Quiet Hassan would naturally be more cautious. He would not completely trust someone just because someone came to save him, unless the other party could resist his poison. Thinking of this, Quiet Hassan's heart hesitated. If what he said before, "not afraid of my poison," was true, then, to believe him. While Hassan was deep in thought, Wu Ming spoke. "I am indeed a member of the Knights of the Round Table, but I am not a Knight of the Lion King. I am a Knight of King Arthur," Vero Cyrus said. Wu Ming did not want to hide it because there was no need to, so Wu Ming calmly told Quiet Hassan his true identity. "Lion King. King Arthur." Quiet Hassan carefully read the meaning of Wu Ming's words. In the end, Quiet Hassan chose to believe Wu Ming. After all, there was no other choice at the moment. She did not believe that Wu Ming could do anything. If the other party was a bad guy, with her current state and the other party's means of moving her without touching her, she was already a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. And if the other party was a good guy, then Quiet Hassan had no worries. "Thank you for your trust, I will take you back to the village of the mountain people." However, at this moment, a voice full of Buddhism sounded. "That benefactor over there, can you save me while you're at it?" This voice was a woman's voice, and it sounded like she had been hungry for several days. Wu Ming looked at the source of the voice. It was a small prison carved out of the surrounding stone walls. Not only there, but there were also many small prisons carved out in other parts of the surrounding stone walls. The Buddha-like voice was the person in the prison that Wu Ming looked at. However, because the surroundings were too dark, Wu Ming could not see the appearance of the person locked inside. "Who is locked in there?" Wu Ming looked at Quiet Hassan subconsciously. After all, Quiet Hassan was an old person here, so naturally, he knew more about the prisoners in the prison than Wu Ming. However, to Wu Ming's regret, Quiet Hassan did not know either. "I'm not very sure, I only know that the person was caught by Agmaguan a few days ago." "Well, let me introduce myself. I'm a monk, Sanzang." As if hearing the conversation between Wu Ming and Quiet Hassan, the person who asked for help began to introduce himself. "Sanzang." Wu Ming was taken aback. The only person who could be called Sanzang was the sorcerer who took 3 apprentices and rode the white dragon horse to the west to pray for scriptures. "Tang Sanzang?" Wu Ming asked. "Aha! That's right, that's me." Tang Sanzang was so excited that he suddenly threw himself on the iron frame of the prison and looked at Wu Ming and Quiet Hassan with a hopeful look. A girl with long straight black hair and big breasts wearing a monk's robe, a monk's hat, and holding a monk's staff appeared in front of Wu Ming. "Ha!" Wu Ming was shocked and screamed. "Are you Tang Sanzang?" Wu Ming knew that Tang Sanzang was a male monk. Even if he knew that Tang Sanzang in this world was a woman through the voice just now, Wu Ming couldn't imagine that Tang Sanzang in this world was a beautiful girl with big breasts. A beautiful girl was still within the scope of understanding. After all, legend had it that Tang Sanzang's flesh could be immortal, so it was understandable that it could nourish oneself and make oneself a beautiful girl. However, no matter what, she should be a shaved head and dressed conservatively. Wu Ming even suspected that the monsters on the road to the west did not want to catch Tang Sanzang because of her immortality, but because of her beauty. Then, were the 3 apprentices of Tang Sanzang also? Well, can you help me out? Tang Sanzang smiled awkwardly. Shaking his head, Wu-Ming shook his head to get rid of his thoughts, and waved the meteor silver. The prison that trapped Tang Sanzang instantly shattered. Great, I'm saved. Tang Sanzang exhaled a long breath and walked out with his staff. Amitabha, thank you for saving my life, benefactor. Tang Sanzang uttered a Buddhist name, his palm vertical, and bowed to Wu-Ming. Master Sanzang, you don't have to be so courteous. I wonder why you are imprisoned here. After all, he was a Tang dynasty great master, and Wu-Ming was still very polite. However, just as Tang Sanzang was about to answer Wu-Ming, the whole prison suddenly exploded. Boom! Chapter 760. A few kilometers away from the prison castle, the solemn knights lined up neatly. Aguin, who was originally unconscious, had also woken up at this moment and was standing in front of the solemn knights. However, even if he woke up, Aguin's appearance and state were still not good. His messy hair was mixed with blood, his pale face, coupled with broken armor, he looked very embarrassed and weak. But even so, Aguin still stood straight, watching the series of explosions in the prison castle at this moment. After all, such a big castle, without special means, it was impossible to blow it up in an instant. Let's meet again in the holy city, Villo. There was no doubt that the big explosion in the prison castle was Aguin's masterpiece. Aguin's face was gloomy, he waved his hand, and the solemn knight set off in the direction of the holy city. Aguin, on the other hand, was knocked out again by the solemn knights. After a while, the explosion in the prison castle ended, the whole prison castle turned into ruins, and even some places were burning, which was particularly conspicuous in the dark night. Behind a big stone around the ruins, the figures of Wu-Ming's trio appeared. Except for Tang Sanzang's clothes, which were a bit messy, purely because of the shock, no one had the slightest damage. Even Wu-Ming's clothes were clean. Tang Sanzang breathed a sigh of relief, patted his huge chest, and looked like he had survived a disaster. It really scared me, I thought I was really going to see Buddha this time. However, Tang Sanzang had already gone to see Buddha, otherwise, it was impossible for him to appear in the form of a servant. Although this great wizard seemed to be powerless, he was indeed a caster servant. Thank you for saving this poor monk's life again, Tang Sanzang said, looked at Wu-Ming behind him and bowed again. It's nothing. Wu-Ming nodded. When the explosion occurred, Wu-Ming immediately used the portal to teleport Tang Sanzang, Quiet Hassan, and himself here. Then Wu-Ming looked at the prison castle that had turned into ruins and walked over. Aguin must have buried a large amount of gunpowder under the prison. Wu-Ming checked the traces of the explosion. Although Wu-Ming had never seen gunpowder before, he could still make a simple guess. It was mainly made up of non-mystical weapons such as explosives, supplemented by mystical means such as magic. That was why Wu-Ming did not discover the explosives buried under the prison castle. After all, if it was just a simple, magic explosive, Wu-Ming would have sensed it the moment it got close to the prison castle. However, thanks to ordinary explosives, Wu-Ming wouldn't be killed by such an explosion. Aguin seemed to be aware of this, which was why he muttered to himself, "See you again in the holy city." From the looks of it, there were only 2 reasons for the explosion in the prison castle. Firstly, he wanted to destroy the information here. Secondly, he wanted to leave some harsh words to Wu-Ming before he left. Although Wu-Ming and the others were not affected, Wu-Ming still felt that it was a pity. I wanted to see if there were any other servants in the prison. After all, if there was a good servant, he could pull it over as a helper or something. As a result, this trip to rescue Quiet Hassan saved a powerless Tang Sanzang. Ah. By the way, my apprentice is also locked in this prison. Tang Sanzang seemed to be inspired by Wu-Ming and suddenly shouted. Wu-Ming was a little helpless. Only now did you remember that your apprentice was locked in here. I'm afraid she has been blown back to the martyr's palace. Wu Ming felt that Tang Sanzang had no dignity for him at all, and there was no need to respect such a girl with the title of Tang Dynasty Great Mage. Tang Sanzang also realized his problem, so he smiled awkwardly. After all, I'm really hungry. It's not easy to support myself and talk to the benefactor. However, Wu Ming was concerned about the apprentice mentioned by Tang Sanzang. The apprentice you are talking about shouldn't be the great sage, heaven's equal, martial canopy, and the curtain-lifting general. Then the holy city might have been destroyed long ago. Well, yes, it's not Ryukong. That apprentice is my new apprentice in this world. Tang Sanzang nodded naturally. Then, Tang Sanzang had a regretful expression. If he was still here, we wouldn't have to starve. After all this time, it was still a matter of whether they were hungry or not. But when it came to the issue of hunger, Wu Ming looked at Quiet Hassan, who was leaning against a huge stone. She had not spoken since leaving the prison castle. Wu Ming could see that she was actually hungry. I'm not hungry. Quiet Hassan said weakly. Grumbled, however, Quiet Hassan's stomach betrayed her, which made Quiet Hassan blush. Of course, because she was wearing a mask, Wu Ming couldn't see it, but through Quiet Hassan's subconscious lowering of her head, Wu Ming could almost guess it. I don't blame you. During the time when you were held captive, you must have been worried about your next meal. If you don't give them food, they will starve to death. Don't doubt it. After all, the masterless followers also relied on food to replenish their magic power. Without food for a long time, they will also die. However, their death would only bring them back to the martyr's palace. However, giving them too much food would not be conducive to interrogation. So Wu Ming guessed that during the time when Quiet Hassan was captured, she must not have eaten a good meal. The interrogation and lack of food caused Quiet Hassan's body to be so weak. Of course, Tang Sanzang was fine. It was purely because she had been imprisoned for too short a time. Quiet Hassan had said before that Tang Sanzang had just been imprisoned for a few days. Wu Ming waved one hand, and a golden ripple appeared beside Wu Ming. This startled her, for fear that Wu Ming would do something to her. Don't be afraid, this is my noble artifact. Wu Ming comforted Quiet Hassan, and then the golden ripple spat out a tube of red potion. Reaching out to catch the potion, Wu Ming handed it to Quiet Hassan. This is a healing potion to restore vitality. Drink it. It had to be said that the game was a bug compared to reality, such as resurrection. The most common healing potion in the game also had extraordinary abilities. Vitality was not something that could be healed when injured, but the loss of vitality was not so easy to repair. However, the game's health potion was able to do so easily. The most amazing thing was that it could even repair the broken clothes on the body. Of course, the premise was that the clothes on the body were not strong armor. However, Quiet Hassan did not take Wu Ming's potion. To put it simply, Tranquil Hassan was still vigilant. Seeing Tranquility Hassan like this, Wu Ming shook his head helplessly. Then, Wu Ming walked to Tranquility Hassan. Under Tranquility Hassan's incredulous gaze, Wu Ming pulled Tranquility Hassan's hand and placed the potion in her hand. Chapter 761. Like I said, I'm not afraid of your poison. Wu Ming said calmly, as if he was not poisoned at all. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming continued to speak. If I have evil intentions, I don't need to trick you to drink the potion at all. Wouldn't it be better to force it on you? After all, after being able to ignore Quiet Hassan's poison, Quiet Hassan could be said to be completely unable to compete with Wu Ming. Quiet Hassan looked blankly at his wrist that was grabbed by Wu Ming and Wu Ming's hand that grabbed his wrist, then looked at the potion in his palm and was in a daze. Drink it. This potion can not only heal injuries, but also alleviate hunger. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Ming heard a hee-hee sound from behind him. Can you give me a tube too, hee-hee-hee. Tang Sanzang smiled and looked at Wu Ming. After all, she was also hungry. It didn't matter to her whether it could increase vitality or not. After all, she was a big piece of meat. For Tang Sanzang, being able to fill his stomach was the most important thing. Just as he was about to take out another tube of health potion from the golden ripples that had not yet closed, the sound of stones rolling came. Walalal dash, immediately afterward, Wuming discovered the servant's reaction. Who is it? Wuming raised his meteor silver and pointed it to the side of the ruins of the prison castle. The sound of stones rolling came from there, and the servant's magic power that Wuming discovered also came from there, and it was a servant that Wuming had never seen before. Wait a minute. At this time, Tang Sanzang suddenly shouted. Is it Fude? Fude. Wuming frowned. The name sounded like a name from Japan. The Tang dynasty's great mage received a Japanese apprentice in the Middle East. Although it was a bit awkward, of course, the other party was a servant after all. It was understandable to be able to experience such an encounter across time and space. I didn't expect this prison to explode. A man with green hair and a ponytail walked out from the shadows. He was carrying a bag of Japanese rice. Although he sounded relaxed, the tattered clothes and armor on his body, as well as the bloodstains and injuries on his body, made it clear that he must have gone through some adventure to survive the explosion of the prison castle. Great! Ting Tai, it's great that you're all right. Tang Sanzang seemed very excited. It seemed like her disciple was still very important to her. Then, quickly use your rice bag to cook for your master. Your master is already very hungry. Wuming sighed. As expected of Master Sanzang. However, the bag of rice was quite big. If there was rice in it, it should be enough to last for many days. I want to, but this little brother doesn't seem to trust me. The man named Ting Tai scratched the back of his head and looked at Wuming with a headache. This was because Wuming was still pointing his sword at Ting Tai. After all, I still can't judge whether you are Tang Sanzang's disciple. In other words, Wuming suspected that the other party was in disguise. After all, the person in charge here was a Greco. If he had a servant who could change into others, it might be true. After all, it was a Greco. Although it was impossible to survive the big explosion just now, Wuming still remembered what Tang Sanzang said before. Her disciple was also locked in this prison, that is to say, the other party escaped the big explosion while being imprisoned. The probability of being able to escape while being trapped is too low. Regarding this, I have evidence to prove that I escaped from the prison. It seemed that he saw Wuming's intention. The man named Ting Tai turned around and began to move the stone. Quiet Hassan and Tang Sanzang were at a loss. The two of them couldn't understand what Ting Tai was doing. With the sound of the stone moving, a fragrance came to everyone's nose. It smells so good. Quiet Hassan suddenly had a big appetite. The fragrance of rice. On the contrary, Tang Sanzang recognized what this fragrance was for the first time. It gave people the feeling that they often ate it. Wuming, on the other hand, was flabbergasted. First of all, how did he make the rice in an instant? Where did he get it from? Wuming took a closer look. In the cracks of the ruins, under the stone fragments, there was a lot of cooked rice. The man named Ting Tai just moved the stone that pressed the rice, which let the fragrance of the rice pass into the nose of the three people. This must be the rice produced by your noble phantasm, Ting Tai. Tang Sanzang, who also came over, analyzed. A noble phantasm that produces rice. Wuming was stunned. This was a bit interesting. Rice bag, Ting Tai, Japan, there were keywords. If Alice was here, she should be able to analyze who the servant in front of her was in an instant. There was no way. Wuming could not bear to read so many books, so he simply took the opportunity to transfer a large number of books to Alice's database. After all, Alice was Wuming's gift. The possibility of separation was very low, so Wuming was so relieved. However, who would have thought that Gidea's strength was somewhat beyond Wu Ming's expectation, or Wu Ming did not expect that the other party would detonate the black mud and wanted to kill Wu Ming. When he thought of this, Wu Ming remembered that his body was still in the Hakata world. I have to hurry up. Whether it was the repair of the singularity or the journey to find the body in the Hakata world, he had to hurry up. Let me introduce myself. My real name is Ituting Tai, and my class is Archer. The rice is produced by my noble phantasm, the endless rice bag. The man whose real name was Ituting Tai said while patting the Japanese rice bag he was carrying. As for how Ituting Tai survived, looking at the rice in the stone ruins, he must have used the endless rice as a defensive means to substantially resist the explosion. Sure enough, food was the greatest. Of course, if you still don't believe me, then look at this. Ituting Tai said as he put the rice bag he was carrying on the ground and opened the lid. In an instant, rice swarmed out of the rice bag. Wah! Ituting Tai, don't waste the food, Tang Sanzang shouted and rushed in front of the rice bag, trying to pick up the rice scattered on the ground. I believe you. Seeing this scene, Wu Ming nodded and put the meteor silver into the golden ripple. Although Wu Ming did not know the man whose real name was Ituting Tai, he should be the one who could use this noble phantasm called the endless rice bag. Thank you for your trust. Ituting Tai laughed and then covered the rice bag and put it back on his shoulder. So, Master Sanzang and Ituting Tai, do you have any plans next? Chapter 762. My original plan was to wander around and explore the local customs. However, I don't think I'll be able to do that, Tang Sanzang said regretfully. Putting aside the fact that this singularity was on the verge of destruction, Tang Sanzang had already been captured once. She did not dare to wander around. What if she was captured by the people of the holy city again? If possible, I'd like to find a place to stay. Katengta scratched his head, looking simple and honest. However, that's not possible. After all, this world doesn't seem to be able to hold on any longer, Tang Sanzang said seriously. Wu Ming was taken aback. Master Sanzang, can you feel the collapse of this singularity? Tang Sanzang nodded matter-of-factly. Of course I can feel it. This world is very similar to the aura I felt in the Great Tang. Wu Ming was enlightened. This meant that Tang Sanzang's background in obtaining the Western scripture was not as simple as it seemed. However, that had nothing to do with Wu Ming. What Wu Ming needed to do now was to pull these two to his side. After all, there was strength in numbers, right? I'm currently helping the Master of Chaldea save this singularity. Are you interested in helping? I don't have any combat ability. Are you sure you want me to join? Tang Sanzang looked embarrassed. Tang Sanzang had no intention of refusing, but he had a clear understanding of his own combat ability. I don't really like fighting either. If possible, I'd prefer to study food, Katengta said. That's not a problem. Master Sanzang can stay in the village of the mountain people, and Katengta can also act as the village's guard. He'll be responsible for the safety of Master Sanzang and the villagers. However, the village of the mountain people is rather secluded, and there won't be any danger, Wu Ming suggested. Katengta nodded, but he did not make a decision immediately. Instead, he looked at Tang Sanzang. Then, I'll leave this to my master, Master Sanzang. Me? What a headache, Tang Sanzang shook his head. He did not seem to be good at making decisions. Even so, Tang Xuanzang seemed to have made his decision long ago. Alright, who asked you to save our lives? I'll bring Ting Tai and join your team. Thank you for joining us. Wu Ming smiled and nodded. No matter when, it was not a mistake to gather people, so Silent Wonder was happy to have two servants in the team. Although Master Sanzang could only be used as a spectator, good. Then, you are my second disciple. Tang Xuanzang looked very happy. Wu Ming, on the other hand, looked confused. What was going on? Beside Tang Sanzang, Itafuta revealed an expression that said, "I knew it would turn out like this." Could it be that Yudingtai was also like Wu Ming and was randomly taken in as a disciple by Tang Xuanzang? Although Ituta had confusedly admitted that Tang Sanzang was his master, Ituta still called Tang Sanzang Mage Sanzang. Therefore, the possibility of Wu Ming's guess was very high. "Well, as long as you are happy, Master Sanzang." Wu Ming shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, he would not lose a piece of meat. Tang Sanzang could call him whatever he wanted. What does Quiet Hassan think? Wu Ming looked at Quiet Hassan. Although he came to save Quiet Hassan this time, he was a local. He had to ask Quiet Hassan's opinion even if it was just for show. "It's up to you." Quiet Hassan looked hesitant. This made Wu Ming confused again. Why are they all so strange? He shook his head and stopped thinking about these messy things. "There's no time to lose, let's go." After that, Wu Ming opened the portal. Wu Ming, Quiet Hassan, Tang Sanzang, and Itafuta went in. In the blink of an eye, Wu Ming and the other three disappeared in place, leaving only the ruins of the prison castle and a little fire, flickering in the darkness. On the other side of the portal was the house of Gadotzi and others. Because they were going to the Yazril temple, there was no one here now. "Wow, this is really amazing." Tang Sanzang, who was the first to walk out of the portal, commented on Wu Ming's portal. "But the color doesn't look very comfortable." Although the color is not very good, this ability is really interesting. Itafuta was also interested in Wu Ming's portal. "It's just a little trick," Wu Ming said modestly. Then, Wu Ming glanced at Quiet Hassan. Because he had drunk the potion given by Wu Ming, Quiet Hassan had recovered a lot at the moment, and walking was not a problem at all. "This is the residence of the Master of Chaldea, you can rest here now," Wu Ming said to the three of them. I'm so hungry, Itafuta, cook for me." Tang Sanzang looked directly at Itafuta. It can't be helped, Wu Ming hasn't given Tang Sanzang health potion yet, so Tang Sanzang is still hungry. "Yes, Master Sanzang, I'll cook now, I'll borrow the kitchen." Itafuta said and walked out of the room to look for the kitchen. At this time, it was the middle of the night, and Wu Ming had no other tasks, so he simply wanted to ask Tang Sanzang some things in his spare time. "Master Sanzang, have you been to the holy city?" Tang Sanzang, who was preparing to travel to various places here, has naturally been to the holy city. "Of course, I have been there, and it was not long ago." Suddenly, Tang Sanzang thought of something. "By the way, I seem to have been caught by His Excellency Iguaoan not long after I left the holy city." Tang Sanzang smiled embarrassedly. "But this is strange, why didn't he catch Tang Sanzang when she was still in the holy city?" And Quiet Hassan, who sat down with Wu Ming and Tang Sanzang, raised a question. "Why didn't he catch you when you were still in the holy city?" "The reason why he didn't do anything to me in the holy city is that, although my thoughts are different from those of the holy city, the Lion King didn't think I was a threat, so he let me leave the holy city." After thinking for a while, Tang Sanzang continued to speak. "Maybe His Excellency Iguaoan acted without authorization. It was because he hid it from the Lion King that Iguaoan detained Tang Sanzang in the hidden prison where Quiet Hassan was detained. If it was Iguaoan, he would have done that." Wu Ming nodded thoughtfully. "By the way, won't this place be discovered by the people of the holy city? I remember that they have been searching for the village of the mountain people." Tang Sanzang asked. In this regard, Wu Ming shook his head. "The location of this village is very hidden, and it's basically impossible to find." However, just after Wu Ming finished speaking, there was an explosion. Boom! Chapter 763. Boom! The sound of the explosion came from outside the house. In an instant, Wu Ming activated his mental power to the maximum, wanting to see what happened. Then, Ito ran in too hastily and said with a serious face, something happened, someone attacked the village. However, at this moment, Wu-Ming also saw it. Located at the entrance of the village, there was black smoke at the moment, which was the residue of the explosion. Although the black smoke was dense, Wu-Ming's mental power was not a pair of glasses, so he could see the enemy in the black smoke. There was only one enemy. Fully armed with red and white armor, and on the tight helmet, the sharp horns like the devil looked particularly ferocious. Red magic lightning emitted from the knight's great sword in the enemy's hand, and it turned out that the explosion at the entrance of the village was caused by this person. Mordred. Wu-Ming said the name of the intruder. Mordred. Hearing Wu-Ming's words, Quiet Hassan was shocked. That lunatic. How did that guy come here? Tang Sanzang also had a dignified expression. It seemed that she seemed to have met Mordred in the holy city, and the relationship between the two was not very good. However, the truth was simple. This place has been discovered. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, he opened the portal and walked in. Destination, where Mordred was, the entrance of Higashi village. When Wu-Ming completely entered the portal closed instantly. In the end, only Wu-Ming's voice remained in the air. The three of you, hurry up and cover the villagers to take refuge, please. To be honest, just as he said that the people of the holy city would not find this place, the other party launched an attack. Although there was only one person, Wu-Ming did not feel lucky. As one of the knights of the Round Table, Wu-Ming naturally knew Mordred. Mordred's fighting style was relatively wild, or rather, she fought like a berserker. It was impossible to tell that she was a knight of Camelot. You could say that she did not use her brain, or that she was simple. Often, such people were the easiest to deal with. But at the same time, they were also the most difficult to deal with. For example, after becoming a servant, she would not hesitate to use her noble phantoms. Claret blood Arthur. Boom. The earth was wailing, and the red lightning on the ground indicated that Mordred had once again used a noble artifact. Ha ha ha. What happened? What happened? Was there no one who could fight? I came here alone on purpose. I'm so disappointed. Mordred waved the king's sword, dispersing the red lightning on the blade and dispersing the smoke and dust from the explosion. To be honest, she was afraid that she would blow up the entire village. Therefore, she released her noble phantasm with the least damage. She wanted to lure the servant out and punish him. After all, she was the Lion King's knight. As a knight, how could she blast away both the enemy and the existence? Of course, it was to kill the enemy and then blow up the village. Thinking of this, Mordred's face under the helmet revealed a sinister smile. However, what caught Mordred's eyes were only the villagers who woke up from their slumber, frantically fleeing, and a few burning houses. This is really disappointing. Then, let this blow end all of you. Mordred said and once again raised the king's sword in front of her. Claret blood Arthur. Magic gushed out from the king's sword, reaching the dark sky. Mordred didn't hold back anymore. It seemed like she was really going to destroy the village with her next attack, just as she had said she would. It's over, Mordred. A voice came from the village. Mordred paused when she heard the voice. She raised the king's sword that was emitting red lightning. Then Mordred laughed impudently. Vilo Theranciad. You are really here. Take this. After Mordred finished speaking, she squeezed her magic and increased the output of her noble phantasm. If Mordred's light pillar was as thick as a wash basin, then she was now raising a light pillar that was as thick as the pillars of a huge palace. As for Mordred, because of the overload, there was a crack in her armor. Since Mordred was so generous, Wu-Ming naturally used his noble phantasm to fight back. Silver meteor, meteor silver splendor. A silver-white pillar rose from the ground in the direction of the village, standing opposite the red pillar that appeared outside the village. Then, the two pillars collided together. Then, like a DNA spiral, the red and white pillars intertwined and spiraled into the sky. The DNA pillar that rushed into the clouds seemed to have some kind of chemical reaction, causing the clouds to change color. There were also traces of red and white lightning. Wu-Ming and Mordred continued the output of the light cannon. Finally, as if unable to withstand the chemical reaction, the clouds rounded into a sphere and exploded directly. Because of the height, the ground was not affected by the explosion. However, the strong light from the explosion made the entire East Village as bright as day. However, this sun only lasted for a moment. In just a few seconds, the sun disappeared, and the day turned back to night. Although it was night time, the surrounding scene was still vaguely visible. Because the explosion of the clouds had completely dispersed the dark clouds above and around East Village, allowing the moonlight to shine on the ground. If the houses that were still burning and the panicked people were removed, the moonlight shining on East Village would definitely be a beautiful scene. If Da Vinci was here, he would definitely be very impressed. Although there was no Da Vinci, others would also be impressed. So powerful. Silent Hassan, who had already walked out of the house, saw the scene just now. She was stunned by the effect of Wu-Ming and Mordred's attack. Whether it was Mordred or Wu-Ming, they were on a completely different level from her, the assassin. That's true. Ifuda nodded stiffly as he walked out of the house. If he had been able to unleash such a powerful light cannon, he wouldn't have had such a hard time dealing with the Terra no Masakoto. What undying devil man! Under the judgment of the holy light cannon, not even dregs would be left. Tang Sanzang, on the other hand, nodded with satisfaction. As expected of my second disciple. This is much stronger than Beiji. Silent Hassan and Kotohira looked at Tang Sanzang helplessly, as if they were powerless to complain. Let's hurry up and guide the villagers. After Silent Hassan finished speaking, she left in a flash and returned to Tang Sanzang and Kotohira. But I'm so hungry. Tang Sanzang looked like he could not take it anymore. All right. I'll make you rice later. Let's go. On the other side, a black-haired man wearing a simple leather jacket and holding a bow and arrow was guiding the villagers away. As expected of the Knights of the Round Table. They're really powerful. The archer who had also seen the previous scene praised. However, it was only a praise. After all, the villagers were the most important. Chapter 764. With the entrance of the village as the dividing line, Mordred was on the outside while Wu-Ming was on the inside. Both of them had temporarily put away their weapons. When the clouds exploded from their attacks, Wu-Ming and Mordred's attacks were interrupted. Wu-Ming's figure was also reflected in Mordred's eyes because of the disappearance of the clouds. However, Mordred had no time to pay attention to Wu-Ming. His armor was cracked, and he was panting heavily. He was using his sword to support his body, looking extremely tired. Wu-Ming, who was in the village, was also not feeling well, but it was not as bad as Mordred's. Because he had used up too much mana in an instant, Wu-Ming was only panting twice. Because his mana had been supplied to the tens of thousands of sky wings, and because the spiritual base's mana was not as good as his main body's, Wu-Ming did not have much mana left. Therefore, using so much mana in an instant was still a bit of a burden for Wu-Ming. However, for Mordred to be able to contend with Wu-Ming, it was truly abnormal. Could it be that Mordred also has the Lion King's blessing? Wu-Ming could only think of this possibility. This was also the most likely. Wu-Ming had learned from Tristan that both he and Gawain had received the Lion King's blessing. In that case, it was not impossible for Mordred to also receive the Lion King's blessing. While Wu-Ming was thinking, Mordred quickly adjusted his breathing, stood up straight, and pulled out the king's sword from the ground. He also took off his helmet. Pretty good, Villo. Let's go again. Mordred had a maniacal smile on his face, looking like a dying flash. Are you sure you can still do it? Wu-Ming came back to his senses and looked at Mordred worriedly. Wu-Ming believed that Mordred had no more strength left. His armor was cracked, and there were some bloodstains on his face. His spirit base was rather unstable. That's for sure. The Lion King bestowed me with a berserk blessing. I can continuously squeeze my spiritual base to release noble artifacts, so you don't have to worry at all. Mordred revealed a smile. However, this smile made Wu-Ming feel rather sad. Wouldn't that be using Mordred to its fullest potential? Mordred's spiritual base was squeezed to the very last bit, until it could no longer be maintained. The energy that was squeezed out would be used on the enemies of the holy city. Although it was harming others without benefiting herself, Mordred seemed to be quite happy about it. You don't need to meddle in other people's business. Villo, you have already become the Lion King's enemy. You don't have the qualifications to meddle in the Lion King's business. Just die for me. Mordred laughed arrogantly. He raised his king's sword and prepared to use another noble artifact. Hey, Mordred, you also have memories of the Holy Grail War when you were in Romania, right? Since it's also, that means you also have memories of that. Mordred nodded. I remember that our relationship had eased a lot at that time. Do you really have to make things like this? Wu-Ming was not willing to fight with the Knights of the Round Table from the beginning. Whether it was Tristan, Egwene, or Mordred, he was not willing to fight. Due to special circumstances, Gawain and Lancelot did not have any hostility towards Wu-Ming when they met. Tristan did not listen to advice, so Wu-Ming directly took him down. In the end, Wu-Ming made a deal with Tristan and did not kill him. Egwene hated Wu-Ming the most, but Wu-Ming only destroyed Egwene's armor and weapon. Egwene fainted mostly because he was angry. The last one was Mordred in front of him. Because Mordred used a noble artifact, Wu-Ming had no choice but to use a noble artifact to counteract it. However, in general, Wu-Ming did not want to fight with the Knights of the Round Table. What nonsense are you talking about here? Yesterday's friend, today's enemy. Isn't this normal? As long as it's the Lion King's order, I, Mordred, will not hesitate to obey. As long as it's the Lion King's enemy, I, Mordred, will not hesitate to attack. You can only blame yourself for standing on the wrong side, Villo. After saying that, Mordred raised the king's sword up high, and scarlet lightning emerged from the king's sword again. However, Wu-Ming, who was opposite Mordred, had a regretful expression. It's really sad. You have to know that you also have a trace of my bloodline. To put it simply, you are also my, shut up. However, before Wu-Ming could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by Mordred's thunderous voice. My father is only the Lion King. Remember this. Mordred's eyes widened as if something forbidden had been touched. The blessing that the Lion King gave her was activated again. Her spiritual base was converted into magic power, and finally, her magic power was converted into a noble artifact. Boom! Mordred raised the king's sword up high and exploded with an unprecedented beam of light. The beam of light that Mordred raised had a diameter that was comparable to the diameter of the entire village. In the village, Xiao Tata, who was guiding the villagers to take shelter, widened his eyes. Hey, hey! It can't be, right? This attack will definitely make us disappear. What? What should we do, Xiao Tata? Quickly think of a way. Tang Sanzang grabbed Xiao Tata's neck and shook him. This. I can't do anything. I can only ask the Villo who has already rushed over. Xiao Tata shook his head helplessly. Lord Villo. Quiet Hassan looked at the direction of the village entrance worriedly and murmured. The scene changed to the entrance of the village. Wu-Ming sighed. Wu-Ming frowned and looked at Mordred. With the power of this demon and your current spiritual base, you will disappear after this attack. There was no other way. Even through analysis, just by looking at it with the naked eye, he could see that Mordred would definitely disappear. The completely shattered armor revealed Mordred's calm expression. Her delicate skin had begun to crack. Blood flowed out from the cracked wound, and the wound was rapidly expanding. The blood that flowed out had begun to turn into magic power and dissipate. This was the precursor of the follower's exit. It doesn't matter at all. As long as I can get rid of you, traitor. The queen will be very happy. At this moment, Mordred, whose face was covered in blood, showed a naive smile. It was very strange. The traitor knight wants to help the queen, but he wants to eliminate me, the queen's close servant. There is nothing more ironic than this. Mordred was angry and wanted to say something, but Wu Ming immediately interrupted her. But you don't have a chance, Mordred. Chapter 765. Mordred's eyes narrowed. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Mordred already felt that something was wrong. Thus, Mordred hurriedly swung down her attack. However, just like what Wu Ming said, Mordred did not have a chance. Something was faster than her. The silver-white chains that were emitting a purple aura wrapped around Mordred's body. Her arms, thighs, abdomen, neck, and finally, the Emperor's sword that Mordred was holding high was wrapped up by the chains. At this moment, the sound of the chains entered Mordred's ears. Clang, clang, clang. The continuous sound of the chains came from behind Mordred. Mordred tilted her head slightly and saw a dark purple ripple. The chains were coming out from there. Although Mordred did not see where the ripple came from, needless to say, it was on Wu Ming's side. Damn it! How dare you trick me? Mordred struggled, trying to break free from the chains, but it was not effective. However, the enraged Mordred once again overdrew his spiritual base. In an instant, the strength of his muscles was raised to the extreme. In the form of monstrous strength, Mordred broke free from the shackles of the chains and waved the Emperor's sword in his hand. However, it did not have any effect. Silver, meteor silver, along with the release of a simple noble phantasm, a silver-white pillar of light collided with Mordred's attack. The atmosphere shook, and the airflow was like a storm that swept across the sky. However, in the end, Wu Ming's noble phantasm cancelled out Mordred's noble phantasm. Mordred, who had been bound by Wu Ming's annihilation lock for a while, no matter if it was her magic or the power of her noble phantasm, they were all destroyed by the annihilation lock. Even if Mordred overdrew her spiritual base again, her noble phantasm was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Therefore, Wu Ming's casual attack was able to cancel out Mordred's noble phantasm. Wu Ming shook his head silently, then looked at Mordred's direction. However, there was nothing in Mordred's position other than Wu Ming's annihilation lock. As soon as Mordred swung the Emperor's sword, due to the excessive collapse of her spirit base, she was forced to leave the stage. That's why it's best to talk less and do more. No matter if you're a villain or a real villain, you'll always fall because you talk too much. In fact, if Mordred hadn't been so crazy, she wouldn't have been forced out of the arena due to the excessive collapse of her spirit base. After all, the blessing given by the Lion King's Holy Grail was to go berserk and not die suddenly. Simply put, Mordred can still be saved. However, Mordred had chosen to self-destruct, and in the end, she did not succeed. Compared to a certain Stella, it was too embarrassing. However, leaving this place early isn't necessarily a bad thing. Goodbye, Mordred. Wu Ming seemed to be saying goodbye to Mordred. Is it over? A voice entered Wu Ming's ears. Wu Ming unhurriedly put away the annihilation lock and looked at the figure. Due to his mental strength, Wu Ming noticed the figure's arrival when it was still a distance away, so he was not surprised. It was the bow-wielding man who was busy evacuating the villagers. You must be Arash Kamango, the great hero of Persia. Wu Ming showed kindness to the archer. I'm not a great hero. I'm just an archer who hopes to stop the war. Arash smiled and said humbly. However, this also meant that he acknowledged his identity. I've heard about you from Cursed Wrist and Chaldea's master. Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Villo. After Wu Ming left, Cursed Wrist and Gadotzi must have told Arash about Wu Ming. The thank you that Arash mentioned was naturally referring to Mordred's sudden attack. After all, if Wu Ming was not there, who knew what would have happened today? That was why Arash thanked Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming shook his head. It's not that hard. After all, he is my comrade. I should be the one apologizing. After Wu Ming said that, he did not say anything else. The same went for Arash. The two of them looked at each other for a while and then smiled at each other. Ha ha ha, let's skip the pleasantries. It's a little too formal. Indeed, as a friend, it would be too formal to continue the pleasantries. Wu Ming had a good impression of Arash, the great hero. It was mainly because Arash's personality was neither servile nor overbearing. His tone was gentle and he was quite polite. In short, Wu Ming liked to make friends with Arash. Villo there answered, King Arthur's subordinate, first knight of the Round Table. Arash Kamango, King Manuchi Hale's warrior. Then, Wu Ming extended a hand. Modern handshake etiquette, I quite like it. Arash did not say anything. He smiled and shook Wu Ming's hand. Then, the two of them spoke at the same time. Nice to meet you. The moon gradually moved to the westernmost side, and the sun slowly rose from the easternmost side. The sun shone on the earth. Although the village was in a mess because of the aftermath of the battle, fortunately, there were no casualties. Even Mordred's initial attack had only destroyed a few houses that were used as warehouses and no one lived in them. Wu Ming, Arash, Quiet Hassan, Ititingta, and Tang Sanzang worked together with the villagers to clean up the village. I really didn't expect that a knight of the Round Table would leave here. Ititingta was holding some wooden planks and was slightly surprised. My second apprentice is here, that guy will naturally leave. Tang Sanzang said proudly as if she was the one who killed Mordred. Although he wanted to complain about Tang Sanzang's speech, Ititingta, who had seen Tang Sanzang's mouth cannon, said that it was better to avoid it, so he immediately changed the topic. By the way, Arash, who is by His Excellency Villo's side, doesn't seem to be ordinary. Ititingta looked at Arash, who was on the other side, sorting out the items with Wu Ming. Arash is also a local servant in this area. He is a legendary figure who can tear the earth apart. In any case, Tang Sanzang had also wandered around this singularity, so he had a lot of knowledge about the local stories. Therefore, he was no stranger to the great hero Arash. By the way, where did Quiet Donor go? Tang Sanzang thought of Quiet Hassan, and he couldn't find her at all. However, Ititingta shook his head naturally, and he didn't know where she went. In a corner, Quiet Hassan was looking at Wu Ming's figure. Because of the mask, Quiet Hassan's expression couldn't be seen, but from time to time, some words full of nostalgia could be heard from Quiet Hassan's mouth. Sir Villo. Chapter 766. In the north, near the mountains of East Village, a black shadow was jumping up and down between the mountains, moving toward East Village at a very fast speed. Not far behind this black shadow, several figures were also moving quickly, but they weren't as fast as the black shadow in front of them. Whether it was the black shadow in front or the few figures behind, they were all familiar to Wu Ming. These people were naturally Gadotzi and her party heading to the Yazril temple. Is Mr. Cursed Wrist in such a hurry? Ma Shu looked at the figure in front of her that was almost out of her sight, and said to herself in confusion. After all, it's Cursed Wrist's village. It's normal to be anxious, Hassan and Matthew explained as they ran side by side. Because the Yazril temple was located on a mountain higher than East Village, the scene of a DNA helix exploding over East Village last night was naturally reflected in the eyes of Gadotzi and her party. If such a thing had happened in Hassan's village, she would have been very anxious. Don't worry if nothing goes wrong, assassin should have returned long ago. With him around, the village will never have any problems. Gadotsi, who was in Matthew's arms, was full of trust and wooming. Hassan looked at Gadotsi deeply, then nodded. But the way Hassan looked at Gadotsi made Gadotsi feel a little awkward. And the reason for the awkwardness was, by the way, Matthew, why don't you put me down? This position is too embarrassing. Gadotsi whispered in Matthew's ear. When they went there, Gadotsi was riding the car invented by Da Vinci. However, in the Yazral temple, Da Vinci's car had some problems, so Da Vinci stayed to repair her car. Therefore, on the way back, Gadotsi was carried by Matthew. After all, the road was rugged, and Gadotsi could not move alone. It was the best choice to be carried by Matthew, Gadotsi's servant. Anyway, it was unlikely that Hassan and Cursed Wrist Hassan would carry Gadotsi. Even if they were willing, Matthew would not be willing to give the opportunity to carry his senior to others. But if Gadotsi insisted, Matthew would still consider it. But, Master, the mountain here is too rugged. Without the help of a servant, ordinary people can hardly move. Matthew denied Gadotsi. Gadotsi also looked around subconsciously. They were now running on the stone wall. If they slipped, they would fall directly. A servant would be fine, but if it was Gadotsi in her human form, she might be done for. Therefore, in Matthew's view, it was too dangerous to let his senior walk alone. It's okay. Da Vinci is still behind. I'll just take her car. Indeed, there was no sign of Da Vinci around Gadotsi and the others. Find a place to put me down, Matthew. Da Vinci knows this way. She is a genius. I'll wait here for her to pick me up. The implication was that Gadotsi wanted Matthew and Hassan to go first. No, I'll stay with Master. Matthew said firmly while stopping at a relatively flat place. She, Mashu, could do anything, but she couldn't leave her senior and Master alone in this deep mountain. This was a matter of principle. When Hassan saw Mashu stop, he shook his head helplessly. Then I'll go first. Hassan said, accelerated, and chased in the direction of Cursed Wrist Hassan. Taking a closer look, Hassan's speed in this group of mountains was almost the same as Cursed Wrist Hassan's speed in this place. In other words, Hassan had actually been taking care of Matthew and Gadotsi. Matthew and Gadotsi looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. But since things had come to this point, they could just wait. Anyway, they could chat to pass the time. She had to admit that Da Vinci was indeed a genius. Her car was quickly repaired. Hey, your genius Da Vinci is here. Da Vinci was driving a strange, small aircraft similar to a UFO, flying toward Gadotsi and Matthew. Lubdavir, who was responsible for protecting Da Vinci, was half-squatting on this small UFO. As a Knight of the Round Table, he naturally had the unique skill of not falling off from the object he was riding. Da Vinci's speed was very fast. Matthew and Gadotsi only waited for a little while before Da Vinci came over in her UFO. Finally, Da Vinci is here. Gadotsi stood up excitedly. Did you miss me, the genius? Tachika, Kun, Da Vinci opened the UFO hatch and motioned for Gadotsi to come in. Gadotsi nodded, walked in quickly, and sat down in the co-pilot's seat next to Da Vinci. Lubdavir jumped down from the UFO. Miss Matthew and I will walk. After all, the UFO's design structure could only accommodate two people, the driver's seat and the co-pilot's seat. Therefore, the surface of this UFO could only accommodate one person. I agree with Mr. Lubdavir's opinion. Master, you and Da Vinci can go first. Mr. Lubdavir and I will catch up, Matthew said to Gadotsi in the co-pilot's seat. However, this was the best choice, so Gadotsi also nodded. Then, Da Vinci, let's go. The nozzle behind the UFO suddenly sprayed flames, and the entire UFO flew out directly. Wait, Wait a minute, Da Vinci, I haven't fastened my seatbelt yet. Looking at the UFO in the distance, Matthew and Lubdevere didn't know what to say. Then, Lubdevere looked at Matthew, his compatriot. Let's go, Matthew. Yes, Mr. Lubdevere. The two also embarked on the journey to Dongji village. At the forefront, Cursed Risthausen arrived at Dongji village first. Standing on a cliff, he looked down at the messy but not damaged Dongji village, as well as the villagers who were packing up and the servants who helped the villagers pack up. Seeing this, Cursed Risthausen breathed a sigh of relief. At least the village was still there, and the villagers seemed to be fine. Immediately afterward, Cursed Risthausen jumped down. In Dongji village, Wuming, who had been separated from the other servants and was helping the villagers pack up alone, looked in a certain direction thoughtfully. Immediately afterward, Cursed Risthausen appeared in the direction where Wuming was looking. Sure enough, you're back, Mr. Cursed Risthausen. Chapter 767. When Cursed Risthausen heard the word, as expected, it sounded rather impressive. As expected of His Excellency Villo. Although I didn't use the aura concealment technique, His Excellency Villo was able to discover me in advance from such a distance, Cursed Risthausen complimented Wuming. You're too kind. His Excellency Cursed Rist also said that you didn't use the aura concealment technique. It's normal for me to discover you, Wuming responded to Cursed Risthausen. After complimenting each other, it was time to get down to business. Since you came back alive, that means you've succeeded, right? As if responding to Wuming's words, Cursed Risthausen tapped twice on his skull-mashed face. Yes, thanks to His Excellency Villo, Sir First Hassan didn't do anything to me. Cursed Risthausen's tone was quite grateful. Then, Cursed Risthausen stretched out a hand with something in his hand. Taking a closer look, wasn't the thing in Cursed Risthausen's hand the small box that Wuming gave him? I'll return it to you, His Excellency Villo. Cursed Risthausen handed the small box to Wuming. However, Wuming just smiled. Keep it. Maybe it'll be useful in the future. Cursed Risthausen was taken aback, then nodded. If that's the case, I'll accept it. Cursed Risthausen was not a pretentious person. Since the other party said he would accept it, then he would accept it. By the way, where are Tachika and the others? Are they still behind? However, after Wuming finished speaking, the roar of the aircraft entered his ears. Then, Wuming searched for UFO and saw it. Wuming was shocked. What the hell is this? Hey, Villo, did you miss me, the genius? Da Vinci opened the hatch, quickly walked out, and greeted Wuming. Gadotzi, on the other hand, seemed to be carsick. She was already lying on the platform in front of the passenger seat, twitching non-stop. How did you make it? Wuming asked. This is a flying machine made from the ores I found on the road. Although it can only accommodate 2 people, it is a genuine flying machine. Da Vinci proudly introduced his masterpiece to Wuming. The corner of Wuming's mouth twitched. Building a car out of pure wood and a flying machine out of ore. As expected of Da Vinci. You might as well change your name to Thomas Alva Da Vinci. At this moment, a black shadow appeared in the surroundings. Seriously, isn't it too perverted to sit on this thing? The person who came was none other than Hassan. At this moment, Hassan had taken off his mask, and the angry expression on his face was clearly visible. Originally, Baihui Hassan was about to reach Dongji village when a strange, big bird suddenly jumped out from behind and almost hit Baihui Hassan. Not only that, this big bird also robbed Hassan of his second person to reach the village record. It was really abominable. What's more, there were 2 people in this big bird. Doesn't that mean that I'm actually the 4th? Furthermore, the one sitting inside was that smiling Da Vinci. That smile was too similar to that of the angel, who bullied her. It was really infuriating. At this time, Matthew's voice also came. Senior. Matthew quickly ran into the cockpit and carried out Gadotsi, who was carsick. Putting the unconscious Gadotsi on his lap, Matthew looked at Da Vinci. Da Vinci, what's going on? Da Vinci smiled embarrassedly. Oh, didn't my Da Vinci number 2 get repaired, updated? The speed increased a bit too fast. Don't worry, I set up a safety device. Tachika-san just fainted. However, Matthew couldn't say anything. He could only hold back his resentment and take care of Gadotsi. Sir Villo. At this time, Bedivere also arrived. Lucius, thank you for your hard work. Wuming greeted Bedivere. However, Bedivere shook his head. Just call me Bedivere, Sir Villo. I have already told Chaldea my identity. Wuming suddenly realized and then nodded. It seemed that something had happened that made Bedivere open his heart. TSK, I already felt that you were a knight of the round table. Hassan looked unhappy. It seemed that she still had a lot of resentment against the knights of the round table. But seeing that she didn't do anything, it seemed that Hassan also understood that resentment shouldn't be vented on allies. Senior Villo, you and Mr. Bedivere really hid it from us. Matthew said with a little temper. Sorry, but even so, I still think it's better for Bedivere's identity to be explained by him. Wuming apologized with a smile. And Matthew was just joking, so she agreed with Wuming's words. On Chaldea's side, monitoring Gadotsi's body, Roman couldn't help but complain after hearing it. I thought it was strange at the beginning. Why would Lucius be friends with the Villo? It turns out that it's the relationship between Bedivere and the Villo. Hearing Roman's voice, Wuming frowned and asked. I suddenly feel that your complaints are so weak. In Chaldea, the doctor's back was gray. By the way, doctor, when will Senior wake up? Matthew asked with concern. Gadotsi waking up as soon as possible is the most important thing for her at the moment. It should be fine in a few minutes. Roman looked at Gadotsi's physical data and replied to Matthew. Matthew breathed a sigh of relief. A few minutes, it's not a big deal. In this regard, Wuming spoke. In that case, let's go to the house and wait for a while. Just in time, we can start the battle plan again. The servants looked at each other and nodded. Soon, everyone came to Gadotsi's residence, which was referred to as Chaldean Embassy. By the way, Wuming brought Quiet Hassan, who was rescued, and Tang Sanzang and Kuroto Ta, who were brought back by the way. Just then, Gadotsi woke up. Matthew, I seem to see my deceased grandmother waving to me. Mashu was so scared that she didn't know what to do. What? Senior, you have to cheer up, Senior. Wuming laughed involuntarily. Well, Tachika, there are new partners here. Don't bully Matthew like this. After Gadotsi woke up, Wuming introduced Tang Sanzang and others to Cursed Wrist and others, and then began the battle meeting. First of all, report your situation in Azrael Temple, Tachika. Chapter 768. Yes. Gadotsi stood up and saluted. After explaining the details, Gadotsi summed it up in one sentence. After successfully arriving at the Azrael Temple, we passed the trial of the first Hassan. After showing the token you gave to the first Hassan, Cursed Wrist Hassan was fine, and the first Hassan said that he would help Chaldea save humanity. That's all. Very well, since the assassin agreed, then he will definitely help us at the right time. We don't have to pay attention to this for the time being. Wuming nodded with satisfaction. Sure enough, after the first Hassan saw that he was here, he made a big promise. Helping to save humanity was not just helping to save the humanity of this singularity. If the last singularity, which was the Mesopotamia singularity, had the help of the first Hassan, it would be a great help. By the way, Villo Senior, what happened in the village last night? Matthew raised his hand and asked. Mordred found this place and launched an attack. In the end, because of excessive overdraft of the spiritual base, she left. The village was slightly damaged, and no villagers died. Wu-Ming reported quite concisely. Mordred. Gadotzi thought of the Mordred in the London singularity. Don't be sad, the servant is just a clone of the heroic spirit. The Mordred in this singularity is not necessarily the Mordred you met. Because she is the Mordred I met. Wu-Ming added in his heart. She betrayed the king when she was alive, but she can't see the traitor this time. It's really ironic. Wu-Ming shook his head silently. However, Mordred has left after all, which saves you from not being able to kill her. Sorry. Matthew and Gadotzi said in unison. Wu-Ming waved his hand indifferently and continued to speak. Then, let's move on to the main topic. Wu-Ming became serious. After looking around at everyone, Wu-Ming opened his mouth. Everyone, I plan to attack the holy city tomorrow morning. Everyone exclaimed in unison. Isn't this a little too early? Hassan asked tentatively. Indeed, and I think it's a little rushed. Cursed wrist Hassan nodded. Actually, it's not fast at all. Wu-Ming shook his head and continued. When I was rescuing Serenity Hassan, I met a Gwaoan. Hearing this, everyone's heart froze. I'm afraid he's already guessed that I've teamed up with the mountain people and will be on guard against us. That's why I'm suggesting an immediate attack tomorrow. I see. The best defense is offense. Cursed wrist Hassan nodded thoughtfully. That was what Wu-Ming meant. If they attack tomorrow, the other party might not expect Wu-Ming and the others to attack so quickly. That would catch the other party off guard. Of course, in addition to that, there was another reason. The village has been discovered by Mordred. Who knows if she has already asked the Knight of Solemnity to send a message to the holy city. However, with Mordred's temperament, it was unlikely that she would make such a delicate decision. The possibility of Mordred not having any Knight of Solemnity following her was too small. In addition, Lancelot also told Wu-Ming that Mordred had a small number of Knights of Solemnity. Therefore, if Mordred's Knights of Solemnity did not show up, it was more or less possible that they had returned to the holy city. Or rather, it was more reasonable for her to order the Knights of Solemnity to, don't follow me. I want to start ravaging alone. After that, all the Knights of Solemnity returned to the holy city. After all, that was Mordred, wasn't it? Assassin, do you mean that the holy city might strike first and send the Knights of Solemnity to attack us? Gadotzi asked thoughtfully. Wu-Ming nodded and added. That's not the worst. The worst should be the Lion King's holy lance. Arash suddenly said at this time. Am I right, Your Excellency Villo? Wu-Ming nodded. The Lion King's holy lance is tied to the mist anchors on both sides of the planet. Even if it's ordinary power, it's not something an ordinary servant can handle. If it's the true name Liberation, it won't be a problem to launch an attack from the holy city. Wu-Ming said something rather terrifying. If the Lion King knows our location. Matthew said lightly. Then aren't we in danger now? Gadotzi continued Matthew's words, looking shocked. So, everyone is busy packing up and moving now. Arash pointed outside the window. Not only that, because some of the buildings in the village were destroyed, and because of the aftermath of me and Mordred, many houses are already in danger. The combination of the former and the latter, leaving is the best way. Well, but, where can we go? Cursed wrist Hassan thought. Let's go to the West Village, Wu-Ming said. My village. 100 Faces Hassan was shocked. But, Your Excellency Villo, the West Village is indeed not far from the East Village, but that's only for us. It's impractical for the villagers to move there en masse. Cursed wrist Hassan was not trying to undermine Wu-Ming's plan. If it was a few villagers moving, it would be fine, but this time, the villagers were moving en masse, and the difficulty had increased by many times. However, Wu Ming did not find it difficult. Don't worry. My ability, the portal, allows me to connect two places I have been or seen at will. There is no time limit, and I can set the size of the portal myself. So, it's not difficult for the villagers to move en masse. Yeah, I forgot that assassin has this ability. Gadotzi clenched her left fist and hit her palm. After moving the villagers of the East Village, we can start preparing in advance. After everyone sleeps for a night, I'll use the portal to teleport everyone over the next morning. If Igualan was here, he would definitely scold Wu Ming for cheating, because Wu Ming had entered the holy city and walked around once. Of course, if the Lion King's holy lance was still maintaining the light film, Wu Ming's portal might not be able to pass through. So, it would depend on the situation when the time came. Question: why don't we attack at night? Quiet Hassan, who had not spoken much, spoke up. Wu Ming did not even need to answer this question. Gadotzi and the others were very clear about this question. It's all because of Gawain, Gadotzi and Matthew replied in unison.